This episode is sponsored by Team Builder, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, Team Builder is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. Team Builder also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try Team Builder, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into Team Builder, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuilder.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, TEAMBUILDR.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show Naval Search and Rescue Corpsman, Command Master Chief, and the man behind Firehouse Freedom, Flip Griffin. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the military, joining the world of search and rescue, some notable calls, his exposure to the fire service, forging leadership, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of almost 1,300 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Flip Griffin. Enjoy. Well, Flip, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks, man. I'm excited. Obviously, to be on. It's a major podcast, so I'm excited. A little nervous, a little bit. I got to be a little fanboyed, a little bit of all the episodes, and I'm like, oh shit, there's some big people on, and to be in that group, I'm humbled and I'm honored. So honestly,
You'd be amazed how many people say that, of all backgrounds, of all platforms. And you know, the beautiful thing is that what they've all got in common is they're humble enough to even think that in the first place, and that's why they're guests. You know, we're all just people at the end of the day, no matter what we've done.
good. Yeah, that's true. Humans are humans, man. I say that all the time, dude. I'm just like, talk about mistakes and everything else, and I make them. It happens. I'm going through it right now with some groups, and I'm just like, I made a mistake too. It's all good, So sometimes we have to lower our expectations.
Absolutely. Well, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
Oh, man. So I'm in the middle of the United States. I am in the Kansas City area. So love it here. I've been all over. Obviously, you know that from, and your viewers who don't, I was in the Navy for 24 years all over the world, and we're stationed in Japan and Puerto Rico and all kinds of places. And I retired in 19. we were in Maryland and we thought it was going to be a forever home. And then her parents were here and there was a lot better soccer. I know it's a World Cup time right now, so and this is being recorded.
Mm-hmm.
So my daughter's going to Minnesota State, and so she's got, so we came to Kansas City and don't regret it at all. Love it. It's a slow pace of kind of California, which I loved, and yet still was like this Midwestern feel that, and I can get anywhere in 3 hours, which is always nice. So, just hop on the plane. So.
All right. Well, that's where you're living now. Let's start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did,
Sure.
how many siblings.
Yeah. So this will be half the show. So born and raised in Buffalo, New York. So I'm a diehard 716 guy. Adopted at 1 year old. So I actually didn't know my mom and dad. I love them to death. They're down south in the villages now in Florida. And so, but born and raised there my whole life. And then 19 was like, I got to do something with this, and did college for a year and was like, I got to get out. And so then joined the Navy at 19. And then way forward in 2016, I did one of the DNA swab testing things. Kind of my wife got it for me for my 40th birthday. And lo and behold, I knew that I had family. I knew that. I wouldn't know where because they didn't let the records kind of go. I got some information in like 2003 about it all, which was a little bit befuddling because it was like your mom's 5'3" and your dad's 5'6", and I'm like 6'2", and I'm like, what's going on here? What's happening? And so I didn't know anything more than that. And so then fast forward in 16, and I get information, and it was like, hey, your family's in Rochester, New York, and my mom, sadly, my biological mother had passed away 2 years prior as I started the search, but ended up having older stepbrother, younger stepsister, and it's all step because there's all we don't want to get into it, but let's just say so, which is cool. So right now, and I'm not a past, right? People do, but they have a lot of people that talk about whatever our generation before us did that's their bags. That's not mine moving forward. So me and my younger brother are really close. I'm actually going to see him in a couple of weeks. And so it's been interesting. Like I always knew I was adopted. I had the problem when I was young, and I was like, what does that mean? We had like nationality day, and I was like, oh, I'm Canadian and Italian. Everybody laughed at me because I was from Buffalo, and they're like, Canada's not a country. And I was like, in fifth grade, you don't know any better. So I was like, actually it is, but right. So there's my trauma, right? What it is. But lo and behold, my mom and dad told me from the beginning, and I've never had really any issues. And so from that standpoint of it, so kind of weird. But then, like I said, go backwards now to 19, or when I was 19, and I'm like, I gotta get out of the town. I got to go do something. So join the Navy. And then kind of that had all built up. So, and then 24 years in 2019, then I retired after 24 years of it all. So, pretty good. I mean, I've had a good, I can't say anything. I had a good life, that from that standpoint, it was good. I was an ADHD kid on Ritalin, one of those types of things, and, but super athletic and all that kind of stuff. So that really helped as I moved forward through and what I was doing in the Navy and SAR and all that stuff. So.
What were your parents doing profession-wise?
So why I'm doing what I'm doing now, both teachers in the school system. So my dad was a business teacher, high school for 35, almost 40 years, whatever it was. My mom started off social work and then ended up in the school system as well, kind of working as a school social worker for the younger. So again, here we go, ready for the trauma. So like all my life I heard, you're acting like the kids I see every day. My dad's like, I know what you're going to be like when you're in high school and I don't want to see you. So it's like, I always had this constant, right? So, and I ended up going to the school my dad taught at, so which was interesting because I had my dad as a teacher actually for one, and everybody's like, oh, did you cheat on it? I was like, I never cheated on the test. I only got an 85 or something in the class, so it was legit. But yeah, I mean, it was a great good experience from that, and I'm a teacher now, right? Like, so teaching the courses and instructing, coaching, whatever you want to call it. Like, I think what I got from them was the light bulb moments. Like I watched my dad teach and put his passion into business and, the business side of high school teaching. And like, I think that resonated so much with me as I got older, and still have a business mindset now and sales side and all that kind of stuff. So, and then at the same time being really compassionate and caring, like my mom to this day still goes and helps out kind of the school that's there. So that compassion side really is the thing. So it made sense. Like the medical was the brand new piece. Like that part wasn't in anything, but like me teaching EMT kind of started to make sense. And then we got into the leadership aspect of the Navy. Teaching leadership just became natural, like wanting to see the light bulbs go off. I can trace that back to, when I was younger and watch that happen kind of for both my mom and dad and what I saw there.
Did you ever have any conversations with them, especially with them both being in the school system, as far as the evolution or devolution of the academic environment? Because as obviously we're well aware now, current days, we're very standardized testing focused, and schools that don't do well on the scores, get funding withheld, and arguably not the most ideal system. And, when you look at the world ranking, we're certainly not number one in education worldwide. So did you ever have that conversation with them?
I think my earliest thing I can remember, here's my moment. My moment was when I can remember my dad, and I can remember him being forced. I think I was probably in college or in the Navy at the time, but I just remember him it wasn't a complaint as much of like change was happening, right? Like, so like, I think he was like forced, I say forced, but hey, you got to turn in a curriculum. And up until that point, they never had curriculums. They weren't, especially for him, because he was business. So there was no state standardized business stuff. English, yes, right? They kind of taught like that. But my dad had always taught kind of outside the bubble of the business world, which didn't have. So when he was kind of forced to go, I got to turn in my curriculums and what I'm going to teach people, that was my, I think, taste of it's getting to be out of his control to some degree, right? And so I didn't realize it until I was older. When I started teaching EMT, and it was very standardized. It was a national registry. You had to teach it. But what I honestly learned from it, though, was the fact of saying, like, how do you then relate that stuff still? Because it's not always relatable to people, right? And so even though we're low, that's grading off of a what curve. And I understand it, right? If you want to take from a national scope, I get why there are tests. I get why there's things are there. I will say, though, I think we have kind of evolution has happened in our brains from phones, from just the amount of way that we do learn, that when I look at my 10-year-old son now and I'm watching how he's learning, you'll watch a movie, and if that movie's not captivating, it's because he's not getting enough, right? He's not getting enough. So I see that in learning as we teach today. And I'm like, the standardized way that we teach sometimes leadership in the fire service, it's right. Like, that's not how this newer generation is going to absorb it. And I know that's tough to do. So then you have to be these creative, the creative side of it all. So I think if I looked back, great question, by the way, because I've never been asked about that, but like the way that my dad kind of adapted and had to, whether he was grumbling under his breath or not, that he had to turn these curriculum sheets in and what he was going to do, it really kind of, because when I saw him teach after that, he was still teaching his way and he was getting through to students. And that was a big thing. So again, all these, whether you're in, there's so much online school now that you can take in so many different ways. And COVID accelerated all that about that change. And like, you can't go to no school in America at this point doesn't have some way to educate their kids if they're not in the classroom anymore, right? Like there is a way to go, hey, we're online today or whatever. Colleges obviously, but even the high schools, like our kids go here, and it's an upper, it's in kind of upper side top 50 in the country for school district, and they're like, hey, we're off today. Go to your Canva, and hey, I'll put the assignment in Canva, and we're doing it that way. So I get it, and I look, this, right, James? Like, there's so many different areas in the United States that have different socioeconomical places that can't teach maybe a certain way or the up and coming. So they have to do sort of grassroots because it's just budgeting aspects that they can't or whatever, that I think, people have to adapt. You got to adapt. You got to relate. You got to figure it out because you're still getting. I don't think things a lot have changed from whatever. I know technology has, but I think we're figuring that stuff out as we go through. Because our generation is the one that ushered all this in, right? Like we were the first ones to not have phones and then have phones, so the rest kind of followed suit.
Absolutely. What about athletics and sports? What were you playing and doing in the school ages?
Name it, I probably played it. So I was a typical basketball football guy until I tore my cartilage, and that was in 11th grade, and then started playing volleyball. We had a volleyball team that we could play, and I loved playing beach, and so we ended up doing that. And then I went on a scholarship at Erie College in New York, and I was running track, so I was a decathlete. So I did that, which again all helped. And then I originally was going to actually go into the Coast Guard to be a rescue swimmer, and they were like, "Hey, you had a torn meniscus. Sorry, dude. Like, go a different route." But I eventually got back to SAR anyways. That's how I got back to SAR anyways in the Navy when they were like, "Oh, you're already in." Yeah, no worries. That was like 5 years ago. So always been athletic. Still am, probably more than I should at my age, right? So, but 2 back surgeries, 9 knee surgeries later, like I'm gonna wear it out, dude. I got one body in this world. I'll wear it out till it's done. So, but love sports, man. Still do, and watching it, everything. I'm all in. So,
when you reflect back now, knowing that a lot of us that enter the uniform professions usually have struggles when we were younger. And I hear this a lot, with people that were in the foster system, that were adopted, that one or both parents left. There is this element, or, one of both parents are there and seemingly don't seem to care. That's another one we'll throw in there. There is that feeling of, why wasn't I good enough for that parent, those parents, etc. Even if it's subconscious and you've got, beautiful, foster family or adoptive family now.
Yeah.
When you reflect back, was that, or were there any other elements that, from early life that maybe led you into this life of service?
So I will tell you, my mom and dad told me early, probably before I could comprehend about the adoption part, right? And I think, I'll be honest with you, I'm going to really date myself, and I don't know if the listeners will understand, but there's a movie called The Toy with Richard Pryor and Gleason, and long time ago. And this kid was like left, and Richard Pryor was like, you got it so good. He's a millionaire's kid, but his daddy was never there. And I don't know why that resonated with me a lot, but it somewhat helped. And that one instant of just like, hey, that whole ethnic, that ethnic day that I was like, I'm Canadian, right? That was like the pinnacle part. And then I never had any issues with being adopted at all, right? Never. And I'd go to like small Italian. So I would go to like Christmas and I'd be like, how's everybody doing here? As I'm talking to all of my relatives, because they're all short. And even my mom, like you met my mom today, she's like, 5 foot, whatever she is. And so I think when I got to college, I was an 80s student, but they were teachers. So they were pushing grades, got to go to school. That was a big pressure on me more than anything about that. So when I wasn't doing immensely well, and now I'm a huge academic, right? Another of my traumas. Now it's like, I'm working on another degree of fire science. And I'm like, so it's like the traumas come back to you later somehow, some way. But I can just remember, like, I think a lot of us in the Navy were like, I didn't know what to do. I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. I learned about weed in my freshman year of college, like a lot of kids do back then, and now still, right? And I was like, I'm going nowhere. So somehow I had the self-awareness to go, I got to do more. Like I can't be stuck in this rut, And Buffalo at the time too, it was going through kind of a down phase of like, it had gone. While I was in it, went through a real 20-year kind of down phase of like just, it'd been driven into the ground. The county had done that. They had some scandals that had happened. It only, last 10 years is where it's gotten back up to be a little bit, not a little bit, but a lot of it better that they put infrastructure. So, but for me, meeting everybody else, we kind of had the same stories, right? There was a story of, it wasn't unloved necessarily somewhere, but there was a lot of these like, didn't really know what to do, was kind of lost, and this is where I went to, right? Like those kind of things were very common in all the people that I had kind of met. It was very much, and I think to your point, right? You know this, at least back in the day, the fire services that had permanent residents, right? That people would the firefighters would live there. One of my friends, his brothers, was like, "Hey, I don't have any place to go. My parents are. I want to do something on my own." He's like, "I'm going to go be a firefighter because it's at least giving me a place to live," right? Like, so I think there's some of that within that you're finding these grit. But I'm going to say this too. I think you find the heart of America, of wherever, of those grittiness, of those blue collars that are built, you end up seeing that they're built for these kind of jobs, right? It's just, I always tell people in the course, I'm like, we all have a screw loose, dude. Like, it's not normal to go rush into that building. It's not normal to jump out of a perfectly good helicopter or rappel 200 feet down, right? Like, that's not a normal thing that we do. And you kind of got to have that resiliency and that grit built from a long time ago to kind of, I think, to get that, right? To some degree. And whatever that grit is too, if to your point where you're saying like two parents that just don't have time for their kids because they're working, that's a resiliency that you learn later too, of like, where were they and why wasn't, and I had to find it in other places. And sometimes that was, I knew a bunch of people were like, my parents didn't care at all for me. And I was like, man, that sucked. I had very caring parents. I just had a different, just is kind of leading me towards there,
You mentioned about Buffalo's demise. A lot of time, and this is rarely acknowledged on a lot of the struggles in communities, but a lot of time you see a loss of industry. So Detroit, with the motor industry, and Ohio with the steel. When you reflect back, were there companies that were thriving that were sent overseas around that time?
That's a good question. I don't, honestly, man, I don't know as an 18-year-old if I cared and or it was in my scope of like, right? Like at that age, I was like, let's party. Where's the girls? Whatever. Way more than I was working on school. But I will say, like I will say this, right? That heyday was the Bills, and I have to relate it to sports because Buffalo is such a huge sports town in the Sabres and the Bills. The Bills were doing well, 4 Super Bowls. I don't want to get into it. It's a huge scar, right? And then the Sabres had gone in 99, right? Like, so we were having these height sports. So I would tell you probably there were some things that were peeling off because I know the city was getting emptied, right? During that time, and most of America, the suburbs were starting to get more and more outflux. So the city itself was kind of being left alone for whatever, and that brings in its own thing. But like the resurgence, and you hear this all the time, like Kansas City's having one now of like down near the river. Now they're opening up the river and the riverfront is becoming something. And I all the places I've been, so DC, Pensacola, you hear these like, and you watch them, right? I guess as old as we get, at almost 50 now, I'll be like, you see the rise and the falls and these waves of everything. And I find like that's the norm. Like that's the norm of everything is you get highs, you get lows, and you kind of, you build back up. And I'm sure eventually in a few years, not a few years, but hopefully Buffalo will be back. Like it was a big computer town when that boomed because it was cold, and people could kind of, industry could go there. I know it used to be a steel town. Like that was before me. That was a big Bethlehem Steel was up there and that left. And then kind of, I think sports probably sustained it for a while and it just kind of was there. And then after that is really when when the Sabres and Bills sucked for a long time and they did, that was kind of the demise. And I think it's now being pumped back in, right? People realize what's there and can kind of go back to it.
Well, I think it's just such an important part of the conversation. Yep. Thank you. Now, when you look at the backstory and you look at the opioid crisis, for example, and how there was a deliberate targeting of communities like that, mining towns and steel towns, and then now fast forward another generation, there's this very judgy, well, if they just get a job, stop taking drugs, make good choices. It's like, but there's a deeper origin story to this. There was a point where there was a lot of things that were proudly made in the US and then everything was shipped overseas and that had a human cost, a generational human cost. So, it's acknowledging that part of our history, I think is important. And now, I heard a Jocko episode a long time ago when he was starting up Origin, and they were looking for basically a weaver for their jeans, for their denim. And they bought an old loom, and then they had to search high and low for a guy that even knew how to use it, because the industry had just been shipped overseas. So even from our ability to just move forward independently, if a lot of these industries would just shut down because we didn't like that country anymore, there's a lot of areas that would be pretty screwed when you look at it.
What I find fascinating right now is kind of what's happening with AI, right? Like, and because that's the natural progression of what you're talking about is what's going to happen with AI. And I find it fascinating that on college campuses, there's a lot of rejection of that. Like even my daughters are kind of rejecting it in a way, right? Definitely my artsy daughter is rejecting it. So I'm finding it interesting to see. And you hear, I think there was, I don't know if it was China. I don't want to, but one of the countries had made a law that basically said you can't just replace a person with AI just because, right, type of a deal, which I thought was pretty interesting. If that was the actual case. So I'm finding it interesting to see that you get a lot of people on shows that are talking about there's only going to be 5 things left, or everything's going to get what. I don't think you're ever going to replace the human element at some points. We may put it on hold and we may say whatever, but like, look at banking right now, right? Like Capital One's going back to walk-in banks because they want people, that is such a personal thing of your money that they're going, hey, let's go back to like walk-ins where you can talk to somebody, or we're getting rid of the, hello, wait to like, you get to talk to a person back right away again because of that. I think you're going to catch rebounds. I guess I can call it rebounds. Like you're going to catch these rebounds of, I think AI is incredible. It has helped me. I know it works. There are things that I absolutely love it for, but I think you're going to find the same type of thing. And I don't know if it's because it's so powerful and because we got caught up in phones, right? Like phone hit us. And I think it took us a while to catch up. I feel like we're a little ahead of the curve of going, we're not going to fall for this again. It's going to happen, but I think it might be less. To me, it might be lessened than it was before because it's community, right? Like it's not. I always refer to the Harvard study. I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's like a 90-year now ongoing Harvard study that was like, what's the biggest thing to longevity in life? And it was community, right? Like being able to connect with people keeps you alive longer, and so. Like I look at that and go, I think there'll be some rebound to it all of going, well, we can't just have, of course there'll be some, but I think there'll be a rebound effect too of what we see with it all too. So great question.
It's funny. I put a post about how proud this country should be about the American team. And it was a tragedy that they were used as a political pawn, with the whole red card thing. And someone said, why did you make this a political post? I thought this was a wellness, Facebook page. And they even sent me a screenshot at the beginning. And I'm like, to have wellness, you need community, not division. I said, that's at the core of wellness, and that's just it. It's not a political post when you're saying, hey, this particular thing clearly is threatened by community. And so they're trying to break it up and make it, pigeonhole it and set people against each other. Whereas the World Cup, as you've probably seen, has shown most of us, look, this is what humanity is. You've got, Iranian players and American players and, all these people around the world that were told at times in history that they were supposed to be enemies, and they're all sharing this love of the sport, whether they're on the pitch or whether they're supporting in the stands. So, I couldn't agree more. We know that community is healing because watch the World Cup. That says it all.
It makes me, and I got goosebumps right now thinking about it. It makes me separate. I wish everybody could get out of the very myopic 10-foot view, 3-foot, 10-inch view on their phone and go to the 100,000-foot view and go, okay, the political world is its own game. You don't have to play it. You don't have to do anything. 2016, when the last election, I was a little stunned. And some people were too. And I don't want to make this into that side of it all. But mentally, from a mental health standpoint, I was so inundated with what was going on nationally and realizing to myself, I didn't have any control over it anyway. Like, sure, I had a vote, I got it, no problem, but I didn't have control over that stuff, right? And so I was like, what am I doing now? So for my health, I was like, I'm gonna worry about my community. Like, if you're talking about what's going on, worry about your next door neighbor, worry about your division, worry about, like, you can get just as hyper about that stuff and do something about it rather than getting hyper about things that you don't have any control over, right? Like, nobody does. Sure, I can vote somebody in or out, and that's my job to do, but you don't, I can't control what somebody says. I can't control what I expect. Like, my expectation levels is leadership, right? So when I look at any of that with my view, I look at it a lens of a leader, of what I feel they should be and how they should act and everything else. So like, that to me is all, that's a simple side. So I'm with you though. You're right. Like, the World Cup, I was like, as you're hearing the BS about all this stuff and why it was, you're also seeing like some dude in Texas from like Denmark going, I'm Texas now, and he's got his boots on, and you're like, how cool is that? Or the Japanese guys that are like, I love this place, and you're like, and I think, so I'm going to give you guys total credit, brother, right? You got the flag in the back right now. I had just gone to England not too long ago, and it was kind of my capstone is what I'll say. Because I'd been in New Zealand, I've been to Australia, I've been tons of times to Canada because obviously my dad's from there, so I was, and I've been to America. All versions of, right, the motherland, as you would probably call it, right? So like, to see that, I was like, I get it now, because I used to think Canada was way behind. I was like, man, my cousins are like so far behind. Not only did they say Nirvana when it was Nirvana, but like, I was like, they're just like, they didn't catch up with a lot of stuff. Like, they were, I always felt that was but it wasn't, because when I went to the rest of the world, I didn't realize they were too what I thought was like, because it wasn't America. And I now realized how different we are versus the rest of it. So it's a great example of when you see all these posts of people on the World Cup going like, oh man, this is so cool, because they don't have stuff like that, right? And we 100%, I think we probably take it for granted. I do, and I know I'm not doing it to the extremes, but you do, you get it. Great.
There was a German fan, I've said this on here a couple of times, quoted as saying, you want to hate America, watch the news. You want to love America, drive through it.
Yeah.
Like, all right, you may as well drop the mic now. You just nailed it. That was it.
Yep.
And it would say the same with everything else. Like, all the love I saw from the British fans in Mexico. People are like, oh, it's so dangerous. You're going to get murdered when you leave the stadium. And all these British fans are like, dude, it was the most amazing experience. There's always videos of them coming out after Mexico lost in Mexico City, and them, high-fiving the British fan, because again, shared humanity. And I think there's so many lessons. So I hope, just like 9/12, like all these other cornerstone events that reminded us of who we really are. I hope to God that when this tournament concludes, that we remember that.
Yeah, well said, sir. Well said. Absolutely.
Well, you mentioned the Navy, so let's talk about your on-ramp, but prior to even the SAR side, what was your initial MO and what made you choose that in the first place?
Yeah, so I came in 96, sorry. 96. So I was 6 foot tall, no acne, didn't wear glasses, and Clinton's inauguration was happening. And so I went to school. I was supposed to go be an ABH on the flight deck, the yellow shirts that are moving the airplanes around. And I had those qualifications. And so they're like, would you like to come to the ceremony, Presidential Honor Guard? So I was like, sure. So background check, I go to DC and I'm standing there. So just the other day at one of the World Cup games, they had the Presidential Honor Guard was doing the flags. And I always know they're different because they stand different. The Navy guys stand different. Their hats are rolled and everything else. And loved it. Absolutely loved it. Was awesome. The history and the heritage I absolutely loved because we had to know that. I got to walk on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for wreaths, so it was super humbling from that respect. I'll have to tell you though, James, I got the best way I can describe it is so put it this way. I was meeting generals. It was a very common thing to meet them before, and they'd come around and say hello to you. And they're just like, hey man, we're just like you. We put our pants on one leg at a time. So the rest of my career is I'm meeting higher up people. I was the guy in the room like, okay, like you weren't the general, like or the admiral that I've already met. So I'm like, Yeah, but I know you put your pants on just like I do. So that wasn't good for some where I should have been a little bit more humbled in areas. But I was like, I just knew people were, if that guy can tell me he's that and didn't care, like little did I know he had already made it to where he could, so he didn't care anyways. But like, so I got to do that. When I went there, I got to get rid of that ABH. I got to choose whatever I wanted to. And I had gone through a few, and then literally, man, I'm going to age myself again. I was, because we could at the time, 98, I'm rollerblading on the steps of the U.S. Treasury, the big stone steps. There was no, you could go right up to it, right? It wasn't like anything now. And I smashed my leg on one of the big marble slabs. That night I went to the ER, met this doctor who was just pretty impressive. He shows me my bone. He's like, you really did a job. And I was like, I like medicine. And that was like what it was. Went in the next day and I was like, hey, I want to go corpsman. So I ended up going corpsman at that point. And then since I was a fleet returnee, I moved. I already had kind of clothes already in household goods in the DC area. So they moved me back there and I went to Bethesda at the time, Naval Hospital. And then I got to choose after that, I actually had a choice. They're like, you can go to oncology or in labor and delivery. And so I went to labor and delivery, which was very eye opening, as you can probably imagine for me. And so then I was like, cool. And they're like, do you want to do something else? And this is where you say MOS. I was just a normal corpsman at that point. And then I saw SAR, who was the first one. It was an 8401. And I was like, search and rescue. And I was like, oh, what's that? And it was little unknown and still to this day, very small niche of just about 100 men and women. And I was like, yeah, let me do that. And so I was qualified to do it because it was EMT, it was paramedicine stuff. So that was all already up my alley. So I kind of was working on that. And then got shipped off to Puerto Rico. So I had a choice to go to there, China Lake, California. And I'm like, well, if I got to go someplace, I might go get an overseas ribbon that I've never had. So I went to Puerto Rico and absolutely loved it. Met my wife there, which is great. I go all the way to Puerto Rico. I'm like, Latina, here we go, right? Like, meet some Puerto Rico. And then this white girl from Maryland shows up at the squadron, and I was like, you're kind of good. And 24 years, 3 kids later, right? Like, so all good, right? Like, great thing. So, but loved it. It was a good experience. I had a mix. So the nice part about, and I didn't know it at the time, that niche, the SAR corpsman, we lived in 2 worlds at the time. We lived in the aviation world because we flew there, but we were owned by the medical world. So you got to see, to the listeners, the medical leadership versus aviation leadership versus even special ops leadership is completely different. So I got to see these 3 variances of like how people did things, which was great because it just added to kind of my, I still say to this day, like and I know the fire service people have some have issues with it, but like your solutions can be, I get that you can solve them, but man, there's so many people are doing stuff in other areas that you can take and adapt. And it would be so much. I got to see that of like medicine leadership doing it a certain way versus aviation, which was way more stricter versus, spec ops, which was stricter, but it was way loose, right? It was like, yeah, no worries, dude. Like, we got you type of a deal. So that was the nice part. So I went to Puerto Rico for 2 years. A lot of fun, did kind of the Caribbean rescue, as I like to call it. So a lot of overwater stuff. In that sense, we were a little underutilized. I think that was a little, the whole career, nobody really knew what we were and what we did in some respects. So that was good. But then I went up to Whidbey Island in Washington State, and totally different world. One of the top 3 or 4 of the SAR stations around the world. And now we're doing mountain rescues, and I'm, off Mount Baker and Mount Chuckson and all those kind of places, which was the complete polar opposite of what I was doing in the Caribbean, as well as, and absolutely fell in love with the area. I was just north of Seattle, not too far. And just absolutely loved it. Met some of my best friends still to this day. And just, it was such a good time of doing that type of a rescue.
What about 9/11? Obviously, you were in prior. Talk to me about that day through your eyes, and then what changed with your unit specifically.
So Katie and I, my wife, we were both coming to work. She had stayed over or something. I vividly remember we're coming to work, and I get a phone call on my Nokia brick phone. To this day, I'll remember that too. I just aged myself with everything here. And they're like, hey, man, go get your shit. go get your stuff. We're sleeping here. I'm like, what? And they're like, hey, it's going down. And we got back to the house and like turned on the TV. And I think we both saw what was happening. She was getting recalled. They were setting down. And I'll be honest, like I didn't like when you heard like planes in the sky and shit was happening. Like I think we weren't as nervous because we're like, nobody's coming to Puerto Rico. Like that's not, there's no target, in that sense. We didn't think anyway. And so, but it was a lockdown. Like it was an instant lockdown of like, a threat condition changed and, you had a big screen to get on base and I dropped her off and she went to her work and I was on. And so truth be told, it was my first day of SAR duty. So I was qualified at the end of August and they were writing like August, I don't know, whatever, 13th or 14th, but the schedule was already written for August. So I wasn't put on SAR duty. And so when it came out, they were waiting for paperwork. And I think I was supposed to be earlier, but then it got pushed. So they switched me to September 11th. So that was my first ever day being on SAR duty. And they're like, hey, we're staying over. And John Kennedy, good friend of mine, was on with me that day. And we're in the barracks. Like when we weren't, I was living out in town at the time. And we were in the barracks and it was like,
no worries. I appreciate it too. Again,
I'm
honored and humbled to be here.
Whoa,
thank you very much.
I think I felt as a country for the first time, it may have been it's one of my defining moments of feeling as a country, right? Like you kind of think individually or team, but that moment was like very, very unifying of me feeling like this is a country. And then the attack of just being so vulnerable. And now seeing, watching the documentaries and stuff from that day, like hearing that George Bush was getting his information as they were flying over cities because we didn't have that, or knowing that, there was no, but so that the agencies weren't talking to one another, and you just find out all this after, and you're like, what? Like you thought it was so much more advanced than kind of what it was. But like at the moment, at the time, it was just like, holy crap. I remember, James, going through not too long after we were blowing up. I was assigned to the EOD guys for a little while, and I was as their med guy. We were blowing up stuff just in the airfield, and I had like a knife which had full C4 because I was hollowing out the C4 to put the primers in, and like I went through the Puerto Rican airport with like a multi-tool that had like C4 resin on it. They were like, what the? And I was like, never would have thought, and I look back on it and they're like, okay, you have an excuse. But like today it would have been, or, even whatever, 16, whatever years later, it would have been crazy, but we still didn't, the impact didn't happen until, 5 years where people were like super hypersensitive to everything. But it was a moment. It was an absolutely moment that I think, that the OJ, I just remember that vividly. I remember, and then as it kicked off, I can remember too, like guys getting pulled to do stuff. And we were already forward deployed, what they called us as forward deployed in Pensacola or in Puerto Rico. So they were like, we're not taking you because you guys were already forward, even though we weren't doing shit at the time. Like we could have easily gone. So there was a little bit of like remorse, like BOLO, like, or not BOLO, FOMO of just not fear. We thought we were going to miss out on it, but it came to fruition in 2006 when I ended up going over. So, it was definitely an impact. Like obviously I'll remember that day forever in that sense.
Prior to 2006, so Puerto Rico, and then, on the mainland here, what was some of the notable rescues that you remember?
So my first one was a guy who his buddy it was in Puerto Rico. His guy was, they were crabbing illegally off the coast of Vieques, and his buddy came up, he went down, he came up, his buddy was gone. Like the boat took off on him. So he didn't know where he was like, whatever. So his buddy finally called in like at night and was like, hey man, I left my buddy, or sunset, he left my buddy. So we ended up going to get him. I know, right? Like, thanks, dude. Like, yeah, absolutely. Blue Falcon moment. And so that was like the first, but we didn't have a lot. It was a lot of medevacs more in Puerto Rico than it was. But when I got to Whidbey, that was like life-changing because they did a lot of rescues, and it was kind of floodgate, right? Because people didn't know. And for the listeners too, in order for a military unit to get called for a civilian rescue, you have to go through, first they have to like the local people have to say it's above our capability. Then it goes to usually like the Air Force Rescue Center, whatever that is. And for us in Whidbey, it would go to the Coast Guard next, but we had a standing kind of thing with the Coast Guard because they only had Dolphins. They'd handle the water stuff because their aircraft couldn't get up high, where we'd handle all the mountain stuff. So I remember my first one, Benjamin and who we were with and everything, and dude broke his pelvis snowmobiling on one of the things on the bottom of Mount Shuckson, and he was all out of place, and I went down, and it was an easiest one. Like I kind of got into that, but then we had other ones of 250-foot rope rappels down to the river where dude's ankles were both busted. We did a bunch of like rescues when the Skagit River did. So Whidbey was really good for rescues. But my next duty station. So after I left there, I stayed there 4 years because I also did the air ambulance. So they call them an individual augmentee, but basically they would pull you from your command and say, hey, go with this extra unit that's deploying. So that happened. So I ended up getting to go to Iraq and Kuwait for stuff. So we were doing all medevac at the bottom. So long story short, the Army was like, we can't do this anymore in 2006. And they were like, we need help. Can you guys do something? And we were like, yeah. So they're flight medics, right? We're getting overtasked. The National Guard, they had all reached their statures of how much they could work. So these units were like, hey, let's call the Navy. So the 2515th was made up of two aircraft squadrons that came together, two different aircraft actually, incidentally, and they kind of formed. It was kind of unique. That's the first time it ever happened. And so what we were kind of assigned to one of those two units, and then we would be the medics on board. So it was good. Like that was like where we really hit our pinnacle and showed the entire naval medicine and everybody else what we were capable of. Because right after that was when all these sea billets opened up for us. So every squadron now that goes on a carrier or is attached to like not small boys, because those are attached to kind of the sonar guys, but the non-sonar or sub-hunting dudes has two SAR corpsmen at it. And we're there for medevac uses, for rescue stuff. That's our sole purpose. So after that, I came home back to Whidbey. I was ready to move, and I had gotten orders to go to Japan. They didn't have any. I was the first one to stand it up at HS-14 in Japan while we were there, and that was, we'll get to it, but it was the greatest rescue that almost happened. So, which was awesome. It was such a great story, by the way. So I've had some memorable ones, but I'll lead it. You don't even have to write it down because it's such a good one. This is so good. So this is great. So we were doing ops with the special op guys in the South. So let me give your listeners a little background. The people who are deployed in Japan now, the carrier that's over there, it's called a forward deployed carrier. People who are in Guam, and then people in Japan, the Navy calls that being forward deployed. So they were the 911, right? If stuff went down with, Kim Jong, whatever, they'd be the first ones to respond to all that. Guam, same way. Well, their deployment cycle was different. So a normal deployment cycle, like when I left there and you end up going like 9 months out, and then you come home for like 18 or whatever. And then your carrier is usually next at some point, right? And then you go out again. So 9-month deployment cycles are kind of normal that you would go out for. Well, Japan is weird because you go out for 3, come home for 1, go for 2, come home for, for a half, go for 3, whatever. They were regimented, but they were very different in that. You'd be home in Japan for 2 things. You'd be home for Christmas and New Year's, and you'd be home for graduation, high school graduation, so that the American school could have their graduation on the carrier. True story. So no worries. So the cycles that I went, we were Guam. Our middle one was Australia. So we got to go to Australia. So we're doing stuff on the top in the outback, which is great. So this is the greatest one. So we're in the middle of Nakuru with nothing. I mean, pitch black, right? Like just the middle of nowhere, middle of the outback. We had to carry weapons. Never would we have thought to do that. But they're like, no, you guys need to carry your weapons because if you guys go down, you're in the outback and you're going to need, right? So we were like, oh shit, this is okay. This is some serious stuff. So Ben Cook, one of my best friends still to this day, senior chief, he just retired. Him and I are doing this strip alert. We're taking these forward air controllers out that are lacing the bombs, and then we're coming back. Now, there was this little the Navy had set up a surgical suite to kind of, if shit happened, we would go out and get that guy if the bomb went off near them or something happened, we'd bring him back and then take care of him. Air Force had set down a nice little landing site and everything, but there is no infrastructure. It's literally the tent in the middle of the outback and what they've carved out. There's an Australian group there, right? The captain's there, commander, whatever he was. So we're good. So we shut everything down. We get driven by a Toyota truck to come back to where they're at. Everything's there. No shit. We're watching Anchorman. Flight suit's down. It's hot. Everything's good. Next thing we know, the commander comes running in. He goes, "Hey, I need to talk to your CO or your helicopter commander." So he goes off. Jake goes out, comes back. He goes, "Hey, they got a mission for us." I was like, "What? Really?" Like, "Yeah." Like one of the forward guys? He's like, "No." He's like, it's worse. And I'm like, "What?" So to be fair, I'm the only one on the crew that came from Whidbey, came from the air ambulance, came from Puerto Rico that had rescue experience. None of them did. The two pilots were lieutenants, right? So young bucks, they may have had one, and then to that point, Ben hadn't had any. So I was a senior guy. I was a first class at the time. So we rush out. We get rushed out. We set the bird up. We're kicking everything out because what we ended up hearing was that there were 36 people in a boat in crocodile-infested waters that was taking on water, and we had to go rescue them. So, dude, we were like, "What the?" Right? Like, okay. So I'm in my game plan. I'm like, "Ben, I'm going to send you down, pick up as many as we can. We'll bring them over to land, and then I'll come back, and we'll keep doing this until we can get everybody off and whatever." So Ben's got he's like about to take his sidearm off, and I'm like, "Keep it on." He's like, "Why?" I'm like, "I want you to shoot into the water." And he's like, "Why would I do that?" I was like, "Because the story's going to be that you saw a crocodile, you shot it, and then kept doing the rescue." I was like, "It's going to be the best. We're going to have 36 people we rescue in the middle of the outback, and you're going to have shot a crocodile." And he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I was like, but the truth was, like, I didn't want him to take it off because if I had to leave him or something, I needed him to have something. But that was the running joke. And at this point, he didn't have any experience. So I wanted to like bring the room down a little bit for him. So he wasn't thinking about, so I was like kind of joking of like, "I want you to shoot in the water no matter what happens." So lo and behold, we go out there, we're busting, we're doing full speed. We're on NVG goggles, literally 30 seconds before we find them. We get a call from the commander, and they go, "Hey, mate, stand down, stand down." We're like, "What?" We're like, "Hey, their bilge pump was running the wrong way, so they were taking on water instead of pushing out water." And we were like, "Oh, dude." So we get back. The movie's not even done. We're like watching it, and we're like, "Do you know what we could, like, we would have been at, the Palace, whatever Australia has. We'd have been getting these major awards for like 36. It was the most insane." So like, if I tell any stories of this shit that I've done, I always tell that one because it's like the one that almost happened. That would have been the most epic thing ever, in the history. So it was a great story. Good, just everything to it. But it was fun. You got to see not only the joint stuff, but you also got to see just like working in the middle of nowhere and making shit happen. Like it was super fun to kind of do all that kind of thing. Best duty station that I ever kind of was at, and whatever I flew at was kind of the funnest that I had in all those things.
Amazing. Was that military training exercise with the Aussies then?
Yeah, we had Aussie forward air controllers that we were taking out and bustering because they didn't have their own. At that time, they didn't have their own helicopter assets, so that's what we were doing. And then we had the Delta guys and SF guys down there as well, and we were doing night op stuff with them into their little fake towns and stuff we had. So we were there just to do all that stuff. That was kind of one of our kind of third or fourth mission. It was kind of one of my first or second. So like, but it was good times, man. Just a lot of fun, real lot of fun. A lot of Coopers were drank, I can tell you that.
Well, going back to Iraq and Kuwait, talk to me about your experience there.
Yeah, eye-opening. I mean, not what I kind of thought. I think it was the first place I had been to that I was like, whoa, like just it really culture hit me, especially when, in 2006. So stuff had already been going on for a long time, at least 5 years at that point. So like just seeing like when you finally saw the mass graveyards of the, the tank graveyards that were out there, because that was kind of near the border, you really, I think for me, it was really hit me about the first part of the destruction piece of it all. And I think nervousness was it in. I got a great letter from my buddy he was in Fallujah, and I found out that I was going, and it was the first time it really hit me where he was like, dude, don't, if you can get out of it. He didn't say it like, if you could get out of it, do it. But it was more like he kind of really humbled. But when you're built up to do a job, and I think about Jarhead where they didn't get to hit the sniper, right? And what that did to them of not. Luckily, I had done it, but this was like a huge, and we had a big build up to it all. So like when Eric kind of sent me his letter and was like, "Hey, you might not, don't be so eager," is kind of more what it was about. But you just, we had a sandstorm the moment we hit ground. So that was like, I hadn't seen, that was a new thing of nature that was like, whoa, this isn't whatever. And then, and then we kind of got into it, right? Routine kind of happened. We realized the medevacs were where they were. You kind of, complacent wasn't word, but you got to see some stuff. It was definitely like, I'll be honest, like I didn't see major stuff. Like I had definitely things. Like I was luckily enough that I didn't hit a huge major. Like I definitely, the one that resonates in my mind, and I talked to my therapist, like I had a guy who was blown up and, skin was dripping off type of a deal. So that was like kind of one thing. But I had got him post. So it was a medevac transfer, but you just got to, but I will say we got to be free. Like there was less constraints of everything. Like people didn't care that we were just taking narcs and doing, like we were all being legit with it, but you can definitely tell how people were just, you kind of got shit done. Like you just, like it was very much less structured than before. It's just a funny story. Like when an army goes, and most of the services, when they go to deploy, they're there just to deploy. Well, that wasn't the Navy's thing. They were like, we were still scheduling training flights and trying to qualify people. And I can remember when this kind of bit us in the ass when we were requesting to do an overwater to keep a qualification that our rescue swimmers had to have. Some of them were going to go down. So they're like, we're going to go into the Gulf and do stuff. And like CENTCOM came back and they were like, wait, why are you doing that? And we were like, because we train. That's if you're not the guy on duty, then you probably have a training flight or whatever. And that blew people's minds because they were like, you're coming to deploy, you train before you get here. And we were just like, no, we still need to qualify. Because I will say, it was a normal Navy squadron. So we had people who were quote unquote qualified to fly, but weren't qualified missions. So we had them there that we were working on qualifications with them and doing. So it was always that. And the Army guys would just look at us like, we're here just to do the job, not to anything else. So I can remember we wanted to do the overwater flight. And they were like, are you guys qualified? And we're like, we're the Navy, dude. Of course we're qualified to fly over water. Like, that's what we do. Here's our flotation. And then we finally figured it out. We're like, we get it now. Like, we couldn't. So that was eye-opening, too, having not really worked joint before and kind of to see how that was working, especially in, we call ourselves dirt sailors, but just to see that all. But then, again, you saw people come in, come out. You saw a lot of National Guard stuff, which you were like, okay, I see why we have a National Guard and why, we don't use them a lot. And a lot of people have a lot of problems that were like, oh, it's my back. And you're like, yep, it's because you're, it is. But I get it, right? Like, I understand that. I don't think anybody was prepared for what that was. Like, it was so long, like 20 years, right? So, but it was the first 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever you want. It was just, we were kind of making it up as we go. In fact, that whole thing was because someone said, can you guys do this mission? And we're like, yeah, we can. It kind of fits what we do. And so, again, great group of guys that I trained all the way through with, and then got to fully do what we were intended to do. So it was super gratifying on that. Like, if I looked at it, Whitby was the funnest, like that. Very gratifying to do what I did at HS-14. Best flying I ever did. But then, like, the air ambulance was kind of the culmination of the skill set, right? Like, we were really getting to do and being really on our own. Because we were fully ACLS guys. So for us, we're very different than others. We were doing Zols and that kind of thing of air, that kind of with ACLS and stuff where most wouldn't be doing that. But it was a lot of fun. It was a good time. And again, we got, as soon as we left, somebody replaced us. They got to do more and more to the point where they pushed us all the way into Iraq by the time the whole thing was done. And they were doing all of southern Iraq that the Navy was responsible for to it. So really gratifying. And again, I think it was a launch pad for like us to go, yep, these guys can do this, and on route care and everything else. So a lot of lessons learned, a lot of fun, honestly, too.
I interviewed Tyler Gray, former Delta, about 2 weeks ago now, and one of his criticisms was the use of the National Guard in Iraq and Afghanistan. You just kind of, alluded to you seeing, some issues with that as well. Now, obviously, his main thing was, look, you've got the forces that are trained full time for this mission, as you said, and even training while they're out there. And then you have this other force that are not, trained the same way. So it makes perfect sense to me, not to mention that most of his community have really said, look, what should have happened in the Middle East is, the top most elite, war fighters should have been in there making surgical hits, removing certain people, shutting down training camps, and then gone again. So you're not seeming like an occupation. I hear that from so many of the like tier one, especially. So, that being said, he's the first person I've said to talk about National Guard, and obviously you just hit it, and obviously a different perspective. So talk to me about that, the difference between these National Guardsmen and some of the other, full-time branches that were sent over.
I lesson it to this, right? And my perspective over the years has, it changed a lot when I became a command master chief at the highest level and got to see how the world, and I say the military world, really operated at that level, right? Like you got to see behind the scenes. And I don't take away anybody's perspective or their opinion about if they didn't get to the higher up level of that shit. And so I listened to that interview and to the same thing. Like I absolutely understood, and you hear it all the time, right? You hear a lot of perspectives like that all the time of how that kind of played out. So for me, later on, like we looked at it as like, why are they sending all these people here who are definitely not to the same standard as everything else? Because I think to some degree, and again, the way we saw it, I didn't see it from a security standpoint like he probably did, and a lot of the Delta and SF guys probably see it from that standpoint. From a perspective of like, are you fit to fight? Do you have more injuries? Are you causing more? Like, we definitely saw that. Now, I'll caveat that with the fact of saying, I'm a big Mattis guy, and reading, knowing that that the Marine Corps was pushed in so far when they're an amphibious force and they're not supposed to go X amount of, right, and saying, no, we can do this, we've got this. Like, there's always a bit of like, and you know this, it's a machoism, it's a measuring contest of, yeah, we got that. Well, we were part of that by saying, yep, we can handle that thing. Was it our primary? No. But I think at that point, the uppers were searching for straws of saying, what do we do? Because, dust off the shelf of nobody had, they're going to take down our towers. And, oh, by the way, we're going to do what we're doing and fight two wars, by the way, at the same time. Nobody had that as in the playbook. Like that was never like whatever. So now you're trying to scrap together and make, fly the plane as you're building it type of a deal. I think there was a lot of that for the first X amount of time, even at the end. Like, I get it. Was there any good way to exit? I don't know. I don't want to, right? Like, would anyone have gotten it right? Probably not. Right. Like, so could it have been done better? Yes. I could look at the whole thing and go, we could have done that. So from the National Guard, like I looked at it as a piece of like necessity, right? Like we can't just, because here's the other side of that. The other side is if you were going to send the people that had already been there and everything else, now you were going to burn out those people way more than they already were, to the point of, right? Like so what's the give up that if you do keep those dudes there, right? Because what are we facing now, right? The crisis. Younger has, I'm sure the book Tribe, of coming home then and seeing this division at home and going, what did I do this all for? Right? Like I'm supposed to be this unifying piece and we're still not. So like you saw a lot of that as you were going in, and like again, they weren't, but I will say this, you could spot them in a heartbeat, not just because of kind of, they were a little bit less in shape or looked in shape. They had the best weapons, dude. absolute, like the biggest scopes, the most stuff. You were like, really? Like, and they're the most pristine, and I'm like, there's about 4 or 5 times we were like, hey man, safety, dude. And you were just like, okay. And I'm not criticizing. Thank you for their service too. I get it, and it is a needed thing. I think from the higher up position, though, I just go, what? There was no playbook, so we had to kind of make it up as we went, and this was the obvious choice to build because they weren't. I got a good friend, Laura Colbert. By the way, you need to interview Laura. She wrote a book called Sirens, and awesome. Just she was an MP, like she was pulled out of the University of Wisconsin. Said she was going to go do this. Didn't think it was. She was just doing it for whatever. Ends up going over there and being in the shit, as the female interpreter, that type of a thing. That's not interpreter, but kind of the female person over there. And she even said too, like you didn't think it was going. Like there was no thought process of this is going to happen. So like until that really kicked in, and some of them still didn't. Some of them still were like, I can't believe I'm here or whatever. Like I can remember just someone riding in a Humvee. And he's like, I've had 5 back surgeries. And I'm like, oh, okay, like I get it, man. You probably shouldn't have stayed in the guard and kept it. But again, nobody is writing that playbook. And in a large standpoint, you had to have answers to like the longevity of something, right? The longevity of that war caused so much more of why we stayed and what it was there for. And I always tell people all the time, like when we look at the state we're in now, I look at going, okay, so you had and I don't necessarily equate it to, political sides, but you had a Republican president that it started under. You had a Democratic president that it was continued under. So that combination of having a full 8 years of a Democratic president who's all about like, why are, there's reasons kind of why, like, that we're in the states sometimes I think that we're in because we did have, because usually you have the ebb and flow when you have that, right, of the ups and downs. And I'm fine with that. Like I like that America kind of gets conservative and then gets a little bit more, more democratic in a way, more blue at times. I'm fine with that happens. But this was that, I think the combination of that war to Tyler's point too, of like, just it's tough. What's the answer at that point? What the answer was, well, we have these people who are supposed to be ready to go like they say they were. And I think we learned a lot too about the Guard. I think the Guard learned a lot about themselves at that point too, of going, wow, we could do that, right? We could be pulled in at any kind of moment like that. So it wasn't easy. I looked at it. I did a whole study on Madison and all their things. And I've looked at this whole thing from a big perspective a lot when I was doing my master's. And it's never an easy answer. It was a lot of how do we do the best we think we can at that time.
Well, I think what you are able to do is reflect and have the humility to say, okay, not only the leaders, but I mean the population as well. I've had so many people on here, veterans that went in just knee jerk after 9/11, and obviously there was a reason for that, and the military knew exactly what they were doing with the recruiting element. That dovetails into Iraq, and I'm pretty sure that was a different country than where the person was that attacked the tower. So now we've got that going on. Then there's the weapons of mass destruction thing, and then now we're learning about Halliburton and all these people that are making so much money as this war is prolonged. And you got a lot of veterans now looking back, going, "What was it all for?" Now they all know they made a difference, and this is what I want to ask you in a second about the good side of when you were out there. But they know that they protected people that were vulnerable and being preyed upon. They know that they were veterinary surgeon and helping the indigenous populations, animals. They built schools, et cetera, et cetera. So they all understood that they're on the micro level they made some difference, but on the macro, what was it all for? And like you said, if we got to the point where a country of 330 million people was worn so thin on their military that they had to pull in the National Guard, from a management point of view, from a leadership point of view, clearly there were a huge amount of mistakes made. And so not only do those people need to, dissect that and take ownership and make sure it doesn't happen again, but as a nation, the next time we're told, oh, this is a country that's bad and we're going to send all our people over there, we need to not have amnesia that 4 short years prior, We had a 20-year war, 20-year wars in the Middle East. So I think just like COVID, after it was done, everyone's like, oh, we're just not going to talk about that anymore. Oh, really? We're not? After all the fucking horrible decisions that you guys made, no one's going to be held accountable. A, it was a real virus. B, the population's health factored in massively on whether you survived or not. These are two very middle-of-the-road conversations that need to be addressed. We should be 5 years healthier now after such a giant near miss that we had, but instead we're getting fatter and sicker. So I think it's really important for us, the average people, to have these conversations so that we make sure that if someone postures towards making the same exact mistake again, we as a nation can band together and go, wait a second, we're not doing that, because thousands of coffins came home with American flags, and 20 years of what? While certain groups are counting the money, and those countries have basically reverted back to how they were before we got there. So I think it's a very important conversation as a patriot to make sure that you don't just shake your heads and, shrug your shoulders and let the same exact thing happen again.
Excuse me. Yeah. Yeah. I from a micro level, I think everybody that I've ever served with, talked to, went, yep, I did it, right? I did what I was supposed to do. I did what I was trained to do. I feel good about what those types of things, what it was. I think at a macro, I do have a different perspective. Maybe this is a little bit. I look back, I did a lot of history. I was a history guy too before I was working on a history degree, and I was able to look at like World War II and Vietnam, and it's all repeated. Right? Most of it is repeated, and community building and in this case, nation building, which is what we knew we were going to have to do after we took down the regime. We knew that doesn't work. Like we've known, we couldn't get in Vietnam. We couldn't do it to them. We didn't win that, right? It wasn't that at all. And we didn't do the same thing here. I will say, I feel like the nation is better, not good, but better to its veterans now than what happened in Vietnam and those veterans, right? Like we didn't know the support systems afterwards, where this was so long. There was so many support systems that were kind of there. And it's not perfect. I don't think it ever will be perfect. But I think you're right. Like I think there's a lot of the same mistakes over and over throughout history that you see and know, are we going to do it again? And to your point, what is this straight about? Well, it's about oil, dude. It's about money, right? Like figure that out. Like it's not right. So I always have said that too, right? Like, well, I like to say, but it's never the right versus the left. That's the game that the top wants the bottom to fight. So they don't worry about the top, right? Like that's, and it's okay. Like I get it. I can be pissed about it. We can discuss it. We can talk about all of it. But that's why I focus back on community and went, well, then what can I do? Where can I focus my efforts to make more of a difference rather than national stuff, right? And I do the same thing. Like when we talk about firehouses and we bring, I'll just do a little turn, but like don't focus on your big things. Focus on your small little stuff that you can, because that'll change eventually the big stuff, right? So the more people and the more people we get in and vote in to be able to on a national, the more change eventually. But it's not tomorrow. It might not even be in your mind's lifetime that we'll see something like that happen if it's a ground roots effort. But what happens? Greed kicks in. Big, machoism kicks in, all of it, right? Whatever it was. I'm a huge Powell guy too, right? And why I like him so much is because he later on reflected and went, I wish I would have had better intel. I wouldn't have done what I did. I wouldn't have done and went and made that national thing, because he was such a trusted person. They knew that. They knew he was going to be the guy, and he wishes he didn't. But I understand, like to that scale, we do the same thing daily or weekly, but not to that scale where it costs 3,000 American lives. And you say, okay, right? Like, so, but I love that. I love that he was able to say later and go, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I wouldn't have done I wish I would have used more in the sense of it all, because I agree with you 100%. You got to talk about it. You got to at least put it out there so people, because you're hoping you do three things, right? I take this on our level. You're hoping that conversations like this either go, it's an aha moment, and people go, okay, yeah. You hope a light bulb goes off, or you hope and I think this is the more important one. I hope you plant a seed. I just want to plant a seed for someone else that I know isn't going to germinate now. It's going to germinate in 5 years. And if I can do that to what I'm doing, right, it's the same thing here. Like, maybe there's something. Everybody's looking at the good. A lot of people won't look at what's the good of all this. My look at the good is maybe we're never in this position again to allow it to get to this point. Like, that's what I hope, is that we're not into that. But I think definitely there was a typhoon, hurricane, whatever you want to call it, to kind of get to this point happening. But I just hope we just go, okay, we don't want that anymore either, right? Good test, whatever it was. Like, that's not, because it hasn't been. It's been chaotic the past, I don't know how many years,
Yeah, many years, both sides of the aisle, like you said, two wings of the same bird,
Yep.
I want to just go back to Iraq, a question that I always ask people that were, deployed in a combat zone. We see, obviously, the polarizing view on TV, either kill them all, let God sort them out, or they're all baby killers, the Vietnam reception. But in the middle are our men and women, arguably children, sent overseas with our flag on their shoulder to hopefully do some good. When you reflect back now, talk to me about the moments of kindness and compassion that you remember, whether it was with, our own military or people that you were there to protect.
We shouldn't have done it, but we did. I remember we were driving to a different base, and they allowed us to do it. And of course, we're young, dumb, not that young, but still dumb. And like, there was a group of herders given like you could give them whatever. The rumor was you can give them like food or whatever, and they would allow you to kind of ride the camel, whatever. And I just remember stopping one time because we had we weren't supposed to, totally not supposed to, but we did. And I think this is the other part of this, right? I can remember years ago when it was like the media, and I heard a little bit about it, but it was like, remember when it was like Russia, it was the Cold War, it was Russia, it was that way. I think what I learned, that memory of like, all Russians are bad, and even what's going on, like what I saw there when I was a normal guy. Like, it wasn't someone it was just a normal guy trying to live his life, do his thing, take advantage of the fact that these people are here. He wasn't mad, didn't seem mad about it, and it was like he was doing his thing from it. I can just remember I think it was like, brought MREs because we knew we were going to do it, and I think we ended up giving him cash too. But it was just this little this interaction of like, he's just trying to make a living in it all, and by doing a simple thing that we thought was cool. And I know I get it, but like, it was little things like that, or when you just talk to people and they weren't all, they definitely, I know, trust me, I know people have seen the bad. I get that, and the evilness of it and everything. And a lot of that was driven probably not by them, by maybe force or coercion or whatever. I get that too. But like, when you saw those moments, like we had like riding a camel and getting our picture, and that was us, and it was kind of, totally American shit to do. But when you talk to the guy and he's trying to speak, into your language, or even the people, like when we were eating food, like, and they were serving, and you got to know those people, who were serving you, and oh, hey, hey, Deepak, or whatever it was going to be. You just saw people who were trying to get around in life. It wasn't this, and it would be completely foreign to us to even think like that. Like the one that hits me the most is when I saw Katrina and what was happening in Katrina, and thinking to myself, dude, that is a lot like what we saw, like the U.S. hadn't seen that. Like, we don't see that very often to that form, but it was a lot like what people normally live in, right? Like, Ukraine's going through this right now of like, that's normal for them, right? Like, and you're like, that's not normal for us. Like, we don't, the dogs get scared of fireworks here, right? Like, and it's there, it's like, gunshots are all the time and everybody's just walking around like it's normal. So I think when we saw that over there, I think it was very eye-opening to go, this isn't all about this evilness that we're trying, it wasn't, that's not it. That's not why that part to me was done at that time. And I also had the good, right? I'll full admission here. I also had the good of seeing people who needed the help all the time, right? It wasn't, CQB stuff. It wasn't moving in and trying to take out bad guys. That wasn't my job. So I was seeing them as whatever. But even in ours, we were briefed, like, you're going to help a combatant potentially, right? Do the order correctly, but eventually you're gonna help a combatant if you need to, right? To make sure, because that was us. That was our code that we live by, and everything else of saying we're here to preserve life. Period. So that I can distinctly remember that camel incident where it was just like talking to the guy and just being just like another human to human, dude, right? Like that we really talked offline, I think, before you started, and just like it's human to humanism, right? Like they're not different. People aren't different when you get down to the ground level of just being humans,
100%. Which circles again. You just watch the World Cup, all these people, some of them from very poor, very simple countries, and they're all, huddled around a TV. I saw Gaza. There was a group watching the World Cup, and I think they were probably watching Egypt, and they were on rubble. Obviously someone had managed to set up a TV somewhere, but just all these people on what used to be their city, now it's just leveled, and they're still sitting watching a game of football. And it was a very, very powerful.
I'm sure that takes their mind off of it all, right? Like, how are we going to take our mind off all of this? Well, let's watch the most popular sport on earth, right? And watch it being played. I think that's the other thing too with the world. I know we're tailing a little bit, but I think I'm realizing now how big soccer really is when you look at like everything, right? Like, and why it's so accessible. And someone said something, I think it was one of the sports athletes, were like, if we didn't have football, we would probably be very high in soccer. Like, it's no sense that the women are very high in this country and the men struggle because of the NFL. Like, that's literally the reason of it. I did a little like AI search afterwards, and I was like, what would happen if the US won? And interestingly, it kind of predicted, and I don't know whether it would have happened, and I'm sure Major League Baseball's glad it didn't, but it would have like probably taken off into a top four. It would have probably changed the dynamic here, and something would have fell off a little bit. And I can imagine baseball probably was like, oh shit, please don't let the American men win, because we're going to feel a hit in people signing up, So it's interesting anyway. I know we're off topic, but.
No, it'd be interesting to see if Major League had anything to do with the red card incident. Follow the money.
Here we go. Breaking on the podcast, dude. It was Rob Manfred and the Boston Red Sox ownership group that did it all. Just kidding. Please don't sue. There you go.
Well, I want to hit one more area and then go to the transition, and obviously, what you're doing in my profession now. I know that one of the last positions you held was the Air Test and Evaluation Squadron. And within that, please correct me if I'm wrong, seems to be the drone side. And it's really interesting talking to people, especially in the aviation side, about, what the next generation of warfare looks like. And obviously there's a good side and a bad side to the fact that humans, mostly won't be fighting anymore. So what do you see as far as that future, having, worked in a pretty unique role within that particular squadron?
Interesting. So my squadron was VX-23, the Salty Dogs. There's about 4 or 5 different squadrons in Pax River that do test and evaluation. So that is, if anything flies in the Navy or Marine Corps, it has to go through Pax River first and get tested. So it's where, if you watched, The Right Stuff back in the 70s, whenever it was, and, Alan Shepard, the whole story about the astronauts, they all came through Pax River at some point. The Navy guys did anyway. And so, in fact, we have a bar in the squadron that was like Alan Shepard and all those guys had been, they used at the time a secret bar that was in the back of our squadron. It's really, really cool. So a lot of history, a lot of everything to it. We actually got the first, I think it was the X-47, don't quote me. That was the first drone that landed on a carrier. We had that when I got there. I think it was the Iron Eagle or Iron Raven. I can't remember the name of it. So it was a big thing. We had the F-35 over at the other hangar, and so anything that was flying, it was jet-wise, it had to come out of ours. Props was another one, and then helicopter had its own squadron as well too. So we actually then also helped stand up the first drone test and evaluation squadron. So we were the transition for another one, the Lone Wolves that got stood up afterwards. I think it was UX. I can't remember the name. And so I got to I was inundated with it. In fact, I was working at a drone company when I first got out called Ohio Drone. That's now Avari. And I was actually working on some EMS stuff side of the house about delivering things, but a bunch of stuff that happened in COVID with that too. And so what I saw, here's what I know. I know that people like the autonomy of not having to put a human in a cockpit, right? Or not having to do that thing. I see that it's what we're seeing now of drones being used, in the Ukraine-Russian conflict. It's devastating. Like what's the swarms that are happening on those? Like we had talked about that all from there, but we had never, right? It wasn't being utilized at that point. Like I remember going through Fallon, Nevada, and they were talking about, hey, this is the potential. This is kind of an Iranian thing that they do. So drones are absolutely, even what, oh my God, what's their name? The one guy that's looks like he's definitely a billionaire. The name of that company.
Elon Musk?
No, not the other one. The with the mullet. Where's the Crocs? Anyways, he's got the autonomous plane that flies with the jets and doing all that kind of stuff. And they have the sub that is completely autonomous. I think it's good in the sense of, do we protect people in that way, right? Because you can do all kinds of stuff, but the eventuality is you're going to have to get down and dirty, right? So the eventuality of all of this is you're going to have to get down and dirty for the next phase. So go back to what we just talked about. Great, shock and awe. We nailed it all in Iraq and all that kind of stuff. But how well did drones work in Afghanistan? Like it doesn't. When they're in tunnels, you're not doing that, right? We didn't have that capability at that point in time. So like, it is absolutely going to be part of warfare. It will absolutely be a phase is what I kind of predict of warfare is going to be, and help. Like you can carry a drone and see things you couldn't see before. Great. But the truth is hearts and minds are going to, is it a part of medicine? Sure. Could I load a guy? Could I request a drone instead of having a helicopter come in like they did in Vietnam? Could I request a drone and that drone take the people? Absolutely. Like 100%. I think that's probably some things we're starting to. And I was part of those conversations a little bit, just in the kind of futures before I had gotten out about that stuff. And it's like, yeah, I get it. Like it will be a part, but I think to overemphasize it or to say that, the exaggerated piece of like, well, this is the only way we're not there yet. We're not there at that point where it's just going to be only. I think it'll be a phase. It'll be a part of it, and I think like everything, it'll help in different areas, whatever that is. But the eventuality is, people with people, right? Like get back to our human thing. It's going to eventually be human versus human at some point of whatever you're doing. So, but it was interesting. I loved doing what I was doing. I loved transitioning to it. When I was working at Ohio Drone, we started working at it when I had first gotten out. I was at a medical company, and we started to bring that in to be able to go, how do we start to use these in mass casualties and be able to kind of use it? And then like I was one of the first people when we got called to say, do you guys have a solution for COVID? Because I was in there, and John Hopkins called and was like, hey, what can you do? And we're like, well, we can put a heat camera on at that point and see if people's temperatures were rising before you sent EMS in, right? See if they knew they were, if they were, if they thought they were going to be that way. It never really panned out, and they didn't go that because they used human touch. But you're going to be able to use it on some things that are going to be good. Look, I was there when I don't have a pizza delivery yet with it, right? Like we're not there. And that was super talked about 5 years ago. Like we're going to be ready for that, whatever. We're not there with it. I think what they're doing in remote areas with it though, like transporting medicine and moving stuff, that, like, especially in the Africa nations and kind of getting things to stuff, I think it's awesome. That kind of thing is really good. I think too, you'll start to see the smaller airports be kind of utilized more. Those will be the hubs kind of as you can see them, as people start to do the pathways from it. So I was pretty involved for a couple companies with drones after I got out. So it was pretty good. I liked them. They're fun.
I think it's exciting, their application in first responders. It's getting away from them using booze to kill people. I had Richard Browning on the show, as the guy that has the jetpack that he's holding in his hands. And there was one video they did a few years ago, and it was getting a paramedic to a mountain rescue, and it's just so quick. It's like, as the crow flies, boom, straight to the person. And I was asking him, what is the potential of them being able to bring the patient down? He said, well, the FAA, you're not going to be able to do that because you can't pilot these with another human. He said, but in the future, probably what you'd be able to do, as you said, is send a drone, a Stokes basket drone or whatever it would look like, send the patient down, fly right behind them, and then obviously that goes straight down to the ambulance. Now, you're also seeing drones being used to identify incipient fires in wildland. So there's some really exciting technology in our world that, again, doesn't involve warfare, that I hope can be used in a very, altruistic way.
I was at a company. I was at about 3 drone companies, honestly, before I got out. I was like every military guy, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do in my life and grow up now, right? But I was at one, and we had gone from talking about putting drones like in the top of light posts, right? And they would be tethered drones that you could use for emergency management kind of things, or have them on. A lot of places use not dump trucks, but snowplows, like the big snowplows that they don't use for the rest of the year. A lot of places use those for emergency management and crowd control and cleanup. And there was thought and talk about putting like tethered drones on top of that because they use them for emergency management. I was even with another group we were talking about it for hemp and for marijuana plants. And they were like, hey, can you come up with something? And I was like, well, you can't fly. So they have to test marijuana plants to see if the levels are above or below. And this was a few years back before we kind of had the rush of it all. And I made a presentation to say we could cut the tops off, put it in, the drone would keep it and fly it directly to the testing facility, because you can't mail stuff because you don't know whether it's hot, what they considered above or below. I was like, so the capabilities of what you can end up doing with it are amazing, like really amazing. But again, you also have to get the public on board that you're going to have all these things flying all over the place. Like that's not an easy thing also to just go, oh yeah, I'm okay with that. Right. Because you get one that falls and then, dude, so I was actually really embedded with all of that for a while. Got some memory lost to me, but yeah, it was some good stuff that we were doing with the mailbox to mailbox transfer, that kind of stuff. Really, really kind of neat things that, again, I'm still waiting to see all that stuff because it's not here yet. So, and that was a while back.
Talk to me about your transition then. You went into the military as a young man. You had a very long career, but, compared to most military service. And a lot of veterans, when they transition out, they find it very jarring. You have this tribe, you have this purpose, you have this identity. And then, like with so many of us, one day the ID doesn't work anymore and you're on the opposite side of the fence now. What was your transition like?
That's a good question. It was 4 years in the making of just trying to figure it out. And I think it's the same thing, right? Because first of all, I always used to say this when people, so in the Navy you have it's the only service that when you make a transition to E6 to E7, you completely change uniforms. You change you go from a petty officer to a chief. It's a major transition phase. None of the other, Coast Guard has it, but they don't take it as seriously. There's 45 days of you being pulled away. I always used to tell people, like, yeah, you made chief, but guess what? You're at the bottom of this shit pile. Like, it's just you're at the top of that shit pile. Now you're at the bottom of the other one. That's kind of the reality of, like, I think of a lot of it, of like, look, I know some people just, they change uniform, they take the uniform off and they go to work because they work themselves into a job the next day, and they're not really feeling the kind of loss. I moved from Maryland to Kansas. I completely severed myself off from military kind of things. And it was probably good for me because I wanted to do that, and I knew I wanted to do other stuff. And a lot of the stuff I had done, like I did a defense contracting job, and I was like, this is not me. The drone stuff just didn't work out. A lot of small entrepreneur stuff some of it's still going, but just trying to figure that out. I put in 72 job applications, 72. I mean, I was going to be all the way from, like, there's a small Air Force base near us, and I walked in, and he's like, dude, you are fully way overqualified for this position of whatever it was going to be in this squadron. And yet it was an hour away that I was going to have to commute. And I'm like, this is not, I mean, I put in to be a toy. I put in to be at a museum, the museum up in Leavenworth. I was going to go and be a curator, for the museum. Cause I was searching for stuff. And I got on I had this full credit. There's this woman here. Again, I'm going to feel horrible not being able to. She runs a after disaster cleaning company, and she was just doing podcasts. And she brought me on, and she wanted to talk leadership. And I was like, okay. And I created this podcast, the whatever thing called The Good, the Bad, the Toxic. And I'd always thought, when I saw leadership, I always thought in those three lenses. I saw good leadership, I saw bad leadership, and I saw toxic leadership. Toxic was easy. Bad was the kicker, because you don't always see bad leadership, right? Sometimes they're really good people. They just don't know what the effect that they're having on a situation. So I did that podcast, and I started then just to do my LinkedIn thing. And I met a guy to do another podcast, same one, called Dale Walls. He was part of Lions Guide. And dude, Dale was, to this day, I give him full props and full credits, got out of the Marine Corps and built an IT company, built it way up to 20 million, whatever it was that he did. And he had still does this great life of doing all this while still having kids. And how are you doing this? And he still is a big self-discipline guy. Huge, was able to, and was teaching people about it and doing one-on-ones. And he goes, hey man, I don't have this leadership side. Do you want to come teach the leadership side? And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. And this was 2022 is when it happened. So it took me from 19 to 22 of where I'm just trying to search for straws and trying to figure it out and be in a bunch of different places. And then I got hooked. I was like, man, this is teaching. We did some mastery classes, right? I was kind of doing that. He was kind of letting me take full kind of reins on it all, learning more about small business and that side, because he's very successful, still is very successful in what he's doing. And it hit me. I was like, I love this part of it all. And then, dude, I swear to God, James, in 23, Annapolis Fire Department, so at that point, I had built the Everyday Leader course, which was kind of my thing. I was teaching it to people and everything else. I had one-on-ones from it, and it was great. Annapolis Fire Department comes, and they're like, hey, Flip, we need this. And I was like, what are you talking about? You need this? Your fire department. You guys have your courses. We're like, this is not what we're teaching. You're teaching like stuff that should seem pretty obvious. That's not at all. In a very relatable way. Like, that's what I was really promoting, was like, this is how. And I can remember I had assigned in my mastery class, I assigned one of the books to this woman named Jen, and I signed Call Sign Chaos, and she reads it. She goes, can you please tell me how going through the streets of Fallujah has anything to do with, and she didn't get it. And that was like my okay, never mind. I gotta relate better about like what this is because he was talking about skip echelon leadership, which is like, you don't need to talk to every single person. I need the answers to make the decisions and stuff. And so I was trying to relate that all, and she was like, so it really hit me of like, okay, I gotta let go a little bit less of my whole military side. And so Annapolis calls, we do the course. They're loved it. They were like, Flip, this is awesome. This is exactly what we needed to hear. I had a good friend, Gary Critchbaum. He just became the Maryland State, kind of the head guy for Maryland State Fire Chiefs Association, just really recently. And he comes into town because he was working at the National Fallen Firefighters as one of the directors. And he's like, dude, nobody's doing this. Nobody's talking in this way. He's like, yes. So that was the verifying piece for me. Right. And I can, to this day, dude, I don't know why I didn't take advantage of it more. I don't know why I didn't go, I'm going to go full in on this. I didn't, right? I should have niched down and said, this is exactly where I should have been kind of the entire time. Whatever the factor was of it, I was kind of blinded. I was also a little bit, I'll be honest, I was also a little bit like, I didn't want to be kind of a person of influence within it. Like that was weird to me because we were taught the humble servant type thing was like, stay quiet when you need to interject. And this was more of like, you know this, like you got to be out there a little bit to kind of, if you're pushing, especially if you're pushing a good message, like there's to get people to kind of notice for that. So I wish I would have done more with them. And then so the end of 25, we made a big push at when I was still at Lions Guide and said, let's do this. We did a 90-day sprint. And we ended up just by a little bit of advertising and a little bit me kind of just buying in and just kind of surrendering to it all. I was like, oh shit, this has worked. We ended up getting a one-on-one, another workshop. And then I had an online course done. And I was like, okay, this is in. I made the hard decision to kind of walk away from Lions Guide. It was a little bit more, he was going to go in a different direction with his IT and kind of was less. And so I was like, okay, I got to kind of do this. And so, yeah. And then, so now it's full bore. And what I didn't realize too, looking back on it, how much fire I was adjacent the entire time. Because every single time we were doing rescues in Whidbey or doing rescues in, wherever, or medevacs, I was working in hospitals. I was working with fire departments. I was on scene with people. Like, so I was there. I was just this entity of being a SAR guy within it all, right? Versus riding in the boxes, right? I've ridden in the box in Puerto Rico. I rode the box most of the time. So like, I didn't realize how much EMS and fire I was part of. So I like to tell people all the time, I'm like, if I was a civilian and a paramedic, which is kind of what we were, I probably would have been assimilated and drawn into the fire service anyway at some point, because most places are now, like they're not, right? They're very lot less of just straight EMS systems anymore. So I was like, this has kind of been and it's my people, man. Like I can talk the same way. We can do whatever. And now I can talk, now that I'm taking my associates in fire, I could talk hoses and I can, the one plaza fire, let's talk about it. And like, I'm in now, like I have some of that piece too. So I think that's part of it. It's just loving to be able to kind of get back with what I know of the people that I know. And then in interjecting these new kind of like seeing generational stuff and knowing now how that we can get, because what I'm seeing, and you probably know this as you talk to people, you got these chiefs that are these 20 to 25 year guys. They're all 9/11 generations. We've been talking 9/11 a lot, right? They all came in, and you mentioned recruiting. You didn't have to recruit after 9/12. People were lining up to do whatever. The number one recruiting tool for the fire service was when that guy did the Iwo Jima thing and Bush was there on top of it and the flag was there. Like, dude, that was their Mount Suribachi of it all, that, everybody was going, how do I help in my neighborhood, in my country? And, you see a lot of the same recruiting problems that the Navy had versus everybody else now, right? Fire service, we talk about recruitment, retention, all that kind of stuff. But like, then you didn't have to have that. Well, those guys are now in charge and they're about to get out. And so when you talk about, like, I find this, it's kind of the eye opener. Remember I talked about the aha moment. They go, well, they're not as motivated as we were. And I go, I hope they're not as motivated as we were. Like, we were motivated because someone bombed the shit out of our towers. I hope that never happens again in my lifetime and in my children's lifetime. Like, so yeah, of course they're not going to be motivated like that. But guess what? Doesn't mean they don't have a drive in there. You just got to you got to dig a little deeper and find a creative way to get that out, because it's there. Like I've got two daughters that are 19 and 17. It's there. You gotta finagle it out of them somehow, because it's not easy,
It's interesting because, that is such an important part of the conversation. The 2008 crash is an important part of the conversation, because that's when a lot of cuts were made, 7 short years after the recruitment boom. But when you look pre 9/11, recruitment was still through the roof. In the 80s and the 90s, firefighters were fighting for positions, and obviously there was some, mostly good. There was some bad areas where certain groups were being hired and certain groups weren't being hired. But aside from that, like the overall recruitment was incredible. And what really pisses me off is you get a lot of people saying, oh, well, kids today, they don't want to work. And it's like, well, what do you think the other factor is? When we were young, when I was, 2004, when I graduated the academy, the internet was in its infancy. And when I looked it up, how to be a firefighter, it was like, well, how to ace your oral interview, buy this guide for $20, and how to, study guides for your EMT and your minimum standards and all these things. That was it. And Ladder 49 came out, and and it's all heroes and dirty faces and saving babies.
Yep.
Well, then fast forward 20 years, and the internet now is giving you everything. And the last 10 years, we as a profession have said, "Oh shit, there's a problem." Like this whole suicide thing, this whole alcoholism, this divorce, this cancer, this obesity. This is a problem. This is something that we can't sweep under the rug because we keep going to funerals. Something is wrong. And so that is also out there front and center, along with all the beautiful things about this profession, which is why 8 years after taking off the uniform, I'm still fighting for them, because it is an incredible calling. And it's not even 1% of the population that step up and do it. But if we don't acknowledge the other part, which is the way that we work our people, and going back to the military equation, if you're mismanaging to the point where you need to pull the National Guard, maybe something's wrong. Maybe, you've spread yourself too thin. The same with this. And now you've got these holes, and now you're forcing the firefighters into mandatory overtime. This is how we got here. And to your point, the chiefs are my generation. These are the snotty-nosed kids that I was in the tower with that knew absolutely fucking nothing, that are now parading like peacocks, thinking they are the fire gods of the world. And it's like, well, I didn't do the full 20 years, but I stayed in the profession. I just didn't get paid for it. I'm still fighting for it. And I don't consider myself a guru in leadership, so I don't know why anyone else would think they had all the answers. So I think this is the point, is that, yes, you have to tap into a different generation that didn't experience 9/11, and that is a beautiful thing. But this generation values their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health, their relationships, and that is a huge testament to all the good parents out there that said to their kids, I'm gonna raise you to be better than me. I'm gonna learn from my mistakes and impart them onto you. So that's a benefit for all the the good parents out there. The bad parents are say, rub some dirt in it, don't be a pussy. I did it for 20 years, you can do it too. But so the beautiful opportunity in the fire service now is to say, the calling is real. The way we worked was broken. We're fixing it with changing the work week, with access to mental health tools, with fitness standards, with all these things that are going to raise the bar for performance and longevity, which in turn will tap into the very things that these young people find important. And we will go back to this high level of recruitment. But if you stick your head in the sand and say nothing is broken, it's just these kids, then that's the reason why your department is drowning in overtime. And, you're going to have to tell your city or your county that you don't have a fire department anymore. So it's interesting watching, because the leaders with humility are already looking for the answers. And the toxic leaders, to your point, are the ones that are doubling down, just like we talked about on a national scale, on the wrong way, because they don't want to acknowledge that actually maybe, just maybe, the way they were doing it wasn't the right way. And if they have the humility to look around and say, who's doing it better than we are, then the rising tide lifts all ships.
Yeah. So a couple things. One, I think there's a lot of, we don't know what to do. And there's a humbleness, and there's the nature of being in the fire service, EMS, military, is it's a weakness sometimes to go and ask when we can't, right? Like, you're not going to go outside. You don't want people to understand your problems, or we've got it really good. We don't want to change, right? We're okay. We're dealing with it, right? Those things are happening. And for all intents and purposes, I understand why that happens at times. I get it. You don't want to be comfortable. I get it. I'm going through right now. Like, when you retire, you go through that same phase of like, I don't want to learn again. Like, I don't want to have to read. That's uncomfortable to do. It's not easy to do. So I get why they have that port, right? Because you look weak. There's a weakness that people think about that, right? To go, well, why are you doing such big changes? What do you mean? Did you not do it right the first time? And I will say this, when you said what worked then, it did work then. It was fine then. Like, it was good for those times, but we're past that point now. We're done. So I'm going to give you the key phrase that I say to everybody that I think is super important, especially about this generation. This generation trusts influencers over institutions, right? And so when you think about that and you say the fire service is an institution, it's not that they don't trust the fire service. It's that you haven't shown them the leader that they want to follow, right? Like, show me because the word influencer is nothing more than the word leader. It's the new age word leader to me. Like, I watched my son's 10. He, gets on YouTube. I watch some of the influencers he looks at. I originally thought brain rot. I was like, oh my God. And then I start listening to what they're actually saying. And I was like, actually, those are some good things. Like, if he's learning that, like, I'm actually okay with that. And then it dawned on me, and it was him that made me think this. I was like, that's his leader. Like, sure, I'm here. I'm his leader, right? I'm his first and foremost role model, but that's what he's learning from. Where we used to go, dude, that's a firefighter. That's my boy, right? Like, that you trusted the institution, you trusted the badge at that point. That's not how it is. That's not how it is anymore. Which is why I have a hard time sometimes when I see, the fast 30-seconders or whatever, or I see the memes of like making fun of it all. I go, they take that more serious, where we blow it off. I go, all the good times when we used to be able to. And I'm like, yeah, but that's being taken seriously. So show me a good fire leader. Not one. I watched one the other day. I'm going to get on a little soapbox here, but I can't. I watched one the other day. Fire and brimstone at a major conference, right? Of like, we got to hold this new generation accountable. How it used to be, accountability. And I'm saying to myself, I'm going, one, you're turning every new generational person off just by your actions of what you're doing right now. That's number one. And I said, number two, you're not fixing the system. I say this all the time. It is a high performance, high risk job scope, right? That equals to me self-accountability, not accountability. So people say, how do I hold people accountable? And I used to say, dude, that is it, right? We got to hold people accountable. I have now switched to say, if you have to hold somebody accountable, your system has already failed. High risk and high performance equals self-accountability. Your system should be self-accountable. The only time you should be holding people accountable is when, hey, I got a deficiency, I need to correct, and it happens, right? We all know that. We all know that, sure, they're not going to get it every single time. I feel sometimes, I hate this to say it, because we were the ones that told them, ask why. We were the ones that said, care about your health. It all came from us. We're the Simon Sinek generations that read it and went, you're right, we should. And now they're asking why, and we're like, hit the easy button and shut your mouth, right? And we got to go, time out a second. That's not leadership. That's not an influencer. Like, I want to be able to go, hey, you want to talk about self-accountability? Great. Then teach that in your system, because you know as well as I do. I love the system. I'm fine with it. But we promote before we have to. We've always done it, right? We've promoted, and then we go, hey, learn it, dude. Everybody else had to learn it. Instead of giving them something, this is another thing, right? Leadership to me isn't the thing you do. It's in everything you do, right? So in that sense, it's got to be something that, because I look at burnout, I look at suicide, and I know this may be a hot take. I look at all those things and I go, that is a leadership issue, right? If you get around the kitchen table more than we ever have, put your freaking phones down, allow your people to get there and talk, then the burnout becomes, when we share that burnout and we open that burnout up and go, okay, then we go, yeah, we're all in it together. I'm going to tell you, and you've been there and so have I, when you're in the shit, it's a lot easier to handle the shit when you're with it with everybody else, right? It goes back to the community piece. And when you feel like that and you don't feel lonely, we don't feel like we did. We've lost so much community things, which were built into the way we used to live, which managed a lot of the stuff that we're facing right now. And we've lost it all because, I hate to say it, right? is this. Like, I get it. And I'm not a huge, like, I'm not against phones. I get it. Everybody's got to learn to use it on their own. That's a whole piece, a whole other conversation. But like, that's a leadership thing to me. You want to talk about suicide? That's leadership to me. And that's super controversial, but I look at like, hey man, we had one fire department that was telling us that they kept, even when somebody retired, they had somebody stay with them as a mentor, like as a post-mentor person to check in on them. They would bring them in for like the parties and make sure that they were still there. So they felt valued. It wasn't just out on because dude, I watched one of the guys who I was with Lions Guide with. This was sad. Like I had a big retirement. And so I was able to because I was an E9 and very, very thankful. I got to thank I watched an Army retirement of someone who very much outranked me. And dude, it was, come on up, take your picture. Here's the rose for your wife. Go sit down. And I went, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Like, this dude just did 30 years. And there's no offense, but there was an E5 that also retired. And he got the same treatment as someone else. And I go, no wonder that guy's head's fucked up, right? Like, what do you do for that? So I watched the fire department recently. So we have I'll give you a little thing. So we have this thing called the Firewood Fire Department. It's not real. It's fictional. We made it up at our company. But what it is it's the best practices that we find across the country. And then it's the worst, like, what can we do so well? You say, I had firewood. This is what we do. That made it in there. That was one of the things that made it in there. Was like, man, you want to help somebody and prevent suicide, right? In that case, be a leader, assign someone to a post to follow up on that person X amount of times or whatever. Is it a little bit of a duty? Yeah. But what you end up with is that firefighter who's now retired and all that knowledge that he has, you assign some young lieutenant to him to check in on him. Go, hey, you doing, bro? Hey, we're doing this thing next week, softball game. If you want to come on out, man. We'd love to have you there. Now they start to interact. Now he's passing down knowledge that is completely organic, right? It's not made up, but it naturally happens because this is what we all want to do when we retire. You know that, right? We'll talk forever when we retire. C story after C story. Then I tell people, I think C stories, well, we call them C stories, fire stories, whatever. Please give me the white handlebar guy was there when wooden ladders were around. I want to hear that. But damn well, you better know how to relate that back somehow, or else it's just a C story, right? So like you hear things like that people are doing, or people putting recruiting teams together, right? To be able to help with the recruitment problem. And I go, do you guys have a recruiting team? Like, what the hell is that, Flip? And I'm like, oh, it's this. This is, right? Like there's this team that is made to interact with the community, right? And I get it. It's extra stuff. But you're getting buy-in then from your company. You're getting buy-in from your people. And so you talk burnout, you talk retention, you talk recruitment. There's three. I mean, right there, you can just see how that it doesn't alleviate it. I get it. I understand to the end of the day, people go, hey, Flip, budgets, man, budgets. And I go, I know. And I have a whole budget fucking side of this too, which I think is also a leadership issue. But to me, I'm going, those things at least help down the road when you start to deal with suicide, when you start to deal with, we can't get anybody to show up here. Well, yeah, that's because, right, you guys look the way that you do. You're not engaging your community whatsoever. What are you going to expect? We don't get any money. Well, yeah, that's because the police are engaged in their community, and the public guy who owns the money sees that they're doing more than you guys are. So why would they want to give you guys money? Right? So I see all those things, and I go, man, those are all, to me, leadership, dude. Leadership. It's in every single piece of it all. Sorry, I got soapboxy there, dude. Sorry.
No. You came to the right place. You're on the soapbox that I'm normally standing on, so it's perfect. Firstly, with the accountability, I'll never forget. I was at the Orlando Fire Conference a few years ago, and this guest speaker spent, I think it was an hour and a half. It felt like 3 weeks of talking about how we need to be into the job, and he screamed at everyone and I was like looking around going, we're at a fucking fire conference. These people are into the job because they've taken time, probably vacation time, maybe use their own money to get better at being at this job. It's like standing in Starbucks and going, we need to get into caffeine. They fucking get it. Can you talk about something else, for Christ's sake?
Right.
So that whole, like, speaking for an hour and saying absolutely fucking nothing, that's gold dust in the fire service. People will bring these people in and spend thousands of dollars to hear them spout that shit. And it drives me
I'm about to get on another soapbox, dude. I'm about to get on another soapbox, dude. So one of the things
I got two more.
Oh God. So one of the things we talked about I brought full transparency, right? I brought my two best friends in on this, and one's still in the Navy and he's doing his thing. He's finishing up. My other best friend, Jason's in on this too. And my goal was always to have my best friends. If I can live my life and go across the country and help out with my two best friends who've been doing stuff, man, I have one in life, right? So all good. And I told them, I kept posting things, right? Doing the thing that I'm trying to do, right? No doubt you need to keep posting and do your stuff. That's just part of the world that we're living in. I get it. But I kept seeing, when I was reading things, I would read problem after problem after problem after problem. And whatever flavor they were saying the problem with, what I wasn't seeing, and these were article after article after post after video, it's all about the problem. Nobody was giving a solution to it all. So I told the guy, we talked about this. This is really somewhat new for us. The kitchen table mentality is very new for us, saying, look, get back to your kitchen tables. This has to be stuff that you talk openly about. Can't be, nobody's going to listen to your fucking speech, or your all hands. Nobody cares. What they want is the real, like, get down to the table and talk one-on-one, right? Or whatever. The other part was the next shift action. I could not stand that we were talking, everybody's talking theory. Sure, we know about, and I started, full admission, right? You go back some of the posts I had and things, I was talking theory, and now everything I write, whether it's for Firehouse Magazine, whether it's for on my own, I'm writing what can you do the next shift? What's one thing that you can take away and go, next time we show up, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to do whatever, because I cannot stand. You're right. I saw a post of this kid who went, I spent all my money on FDIC. This is what freaked me out about it. I spent all my money on FDIC, and no hate to anything. And he went, what do people do afterwards? And he was kind of asking, like, what do we do? And I've been to GEMS. I've been to a bunch of those conferences too, where you're like, cool, I take away, I got my free scissors. Yay, right? I got my free trauma shears. And right. And what did I take away? I took away maybe one or two things that I was like, okay, maybe. And I get it. It's a mass thing, and they're trying to bring in, and everybody's going to get something different. They're not going to get. But I was also thinking, why isn't this a daily thing that we go, dude, what can I do on my next shift? What can I do to make an impact tomorrow, right? Like, one of the things I tell people all the time is they're like, oh, so Truth About Employee Engagement, right? It's one of the Patrick Lencioni books. And he's like, they need to know that their job matters and how it connects into the bigger picture. People need to understand that, to have that sense of belonging. So I tell people all the time, I'm like, do you give attaboys and attagirls at the end of the week? And they're like, no, why would I do that? And I'm like, well, are your people doing what you're asking them to do? Yeah, they're doing what they're supposed to do. Do you ever just give an attaboy or an attagirl, hey, thanks a lot, man. Saw you did those hoses this week, man. I thought that was really good. And people looked at me so I first brought this up. You'll love this. I first brought this up with a very high executive at Under Armour. And he's on our mastery call, and I'm talking to him. I think he's at Under Armour. He works a lot with them. It might be those, whatever it was. And he said to me, he goes, yeah, Flip, but if I'm doing that every week, then they're going to expect it. And I go, say that again. And he's like, well, if I give them an attaboy every week or attagirl, then they're going to expect it every week. And I go, well, would you give it if they didn't earn that attaboy or attagirl? He's like, no, absolutely not. I was like, so they're doing stuff that you want them to do, and you're recognizing it every week. Yeah. I don't understand the problem here. They're doing what you want them to do, and all they're looking for is that. And I put it into context for a fire chief before, and I said, dude, how long does it take you to get an award through? Well, it's got to go all the way up to the city, and right, we got to get it that. I said, that's cool. So six weeks later, you're giving out an award to someone when you could have, like, what? I don't know, given a coin and said, hey, dude, great job this week. Seriously. I know it seems simple, but man, that little stuff it's the everyday things to me, right? Like, that's what matters more. I look back at my career, and I'm sure you do too. It was never the big shit. It was never the big things why people would call. It was the Flip, thanks so much for having this, for having that meeting in your office about, me and my wife and our financial problems. I was like, really, sir? That's what it was about? Like, it was always the small stuff. So I was like, so an attaboy and attagirl at the end of the week, and people are like, oh, and then they're like, well, I'll forget. I'm like, then write it the fuck down. Like, create your own leadership list that you can do on a Friday and go, man, I'm going to go out in the bay and I'm going to find something that someone's doing, whether it's extraordinary or ordinary, and go, I'm going to recognize that. Because I'm going to tell you, you want to talk about suicide, and you want to talk about burnout, you give me an attaboy or an attagirl on a Friday, and I had a hard week, but you recognize that I did hard work, man, that'll carry me through the weekend, and I'll want to show up on Monday. 100%, bro. 100%.
With the organizational betrayal.
Passion again. Got up again.
No. You're amongst friends, I promise. It's amazing how many people I've had on the show that, they really are trailblazers in the fire service, whether it's the operational side or the leadership side or whatever. And you ask them, well, how are you received in your own department? And they're vilified, and there's so many people that I know of and some suicides that I'm fully aware of, that was the biggest contributing factor, whether they were struggling and thank God didn't take that, final move, or some of them, that we know damn well it was organizational betrayal, toxic, culture, whatever it was, that was, if not a big contributing factor, certainly the final nail in the coffin. And this is the danger, and I've had this conversation a lot with putting the wrong people in positions of power, whether it's nationally or whether it's in the fire service. And to your point about solutions, this is why I started this fucking podcast 10 years ago, because it was the same thing. Like, I was not an expert. I'm an athlete, I'm a coach, I'm a firefighter, I'm a paramedic, I'm a stuntman, I'm a father, but I'm jack of all trades, master of none, which is the very core of being a firefighter paramedic in America. But my thing was, there are people that spend their entire lives studying this one thing or doing this one thing. That's who we need to ask. And 99% of them don't wear a fire service uniform. So that was why my guest list is so diverse. I mean, ask the real experts, the neuroscientists, the strength and conditioning coaches, the weapons manufacturer, whatever it is, these top people, and get the solutions. And one of the biggest things that to me has just been, it's the perfect analogy for this whole thing, was the work week, which is the origin story of this podcast. Was listening to Navy SEAL Dr. Kirk Parsley, left the SEAL teams, became a physician, went back to the West Coast teams. After about a year, saw all the guys were on Ambien, their blood work was in the toilet, and he dove into the world of sleep medicine. Was like, oh shit, this is the thing. Yeah, the hormonal disruption, the mental health, the lack of acuity, all things. And I'm like, okay, well, this is obviously huge in our profession. Start getting all these people, world-renowned experts in this field, every sleep medicine expert from all branches of the military. The Venn diagram overlaps, and it's like, okay, this isn't a hypothesis. This is an absolute truth. Sleep deprivation is detrimental for performance in an acute sense, and absolutely devastating in a chronic sense as far as physical and mental health and disease. Just irrefutable. But trying to send that message, we're finally now seeing the beginning of a revolution. But that's after 7 years of being vilified and told to sit down and shut up, which I don't do, so they can waste their fucking breath on that. But but you realize that this is a truth. And then to your point with, but it's the budget. What I realize is that the way that fire departments have been operated around the country is you have a hose pipe on the intake of the engine, and then the 4-inch discharge is open. And people are like, oh, we just don't have enough money. It's like, well, has anyone ever fucking said to shut the valve on the discharge? Which is addressing the things that are broken, the work week, mental health, fitness standards. The money is there, but it's being pissed out the back. And we're seeing so many stories now. Firefighter made or battalion chief made $1 million, in salary and overtime.
Right, the Texas guy or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so is this happening because he's just pilfering money, or is it saying there are so many vacancies in these fire departments that the overtime is out, just insane? And then you think about the level of performance that BC is operating. Would you want him commanding a fire after working a 72 or 120 hour shift? Absolutely fucking not. I wouldn't want them driving around the same street as my kids. So the money is there. And this is what's so infuriating, is we've got these people doubling down on their lunacy and refusing to bring solutions to problems when these problems have already been fucking solved. And all it takes is the humility to say, hey, I see that's working in your department. Can you tell us how you did it? And that's happening now. But the resistance has been nauseating from the admin, from the chiefs, from the unions, and even the little dipshits in uniform themselves. Oh, the 4896 was the best. Shut the fuck up. Like, listen to what you were saying. Your department is crumbling. No one wants to work for them. No one's staying for them. And you think that everything is fine. It is not fine. So it's time to just zip it and allow the big boys and girls to talk to these departments that have figured out the problem, and then ask them, how did you did it? Then figure out how long can we take to transition, and you then will see the same successes that they're seeing. But the arrogance that I am seeing in this profession that will double down on doing it the wrong way rather than finally having the courage to say, it's not working. Firsthand, through my lens, my own personal experience has been nauseating. And it's so amazing to watch these departments say, we're not doing this anymore. And in Florida, especially, you're seeing it travel like wildfire this new work week. Their recruitment is through the roof. Their retention's through the roof. The overtime positions are becoming minimized. They're saving the taxpayer money. They've got another entire shift of men and women to respond on their worst days. So it's happening now. But to your point, for too long, we've had conferences and, Insta-famous fire influencers that are beating their chests about, kids have got to be into the job. And now we are to bring light to this rant of mine. We have turned a corner, and if you just Google 24/72, you will find these departments that are starting to really blaze a new path. And massive respect to anyone in those departments that was fighting the fight upstream. Because you talk about organizational betrayal, try bring a solution to a fire department, and you'll see what toxic leadership really looks like.
Yeah, I again, the hierarchy, the history within the service. And let me be clear too. I don't want to ever come across on anything as hypocritical. I stay away from the fire ground side of the world, because that's not, I can't speak on that, right? I can't speak on that side. But what we've also seen is to isolate the firehouse versus the fire ground and how we lead on those. What I found when I was doing my research was I was working on a master's of emergency response and risk mitigation. And when I was doing 40 case studies around the world about different things, about how people were doing stuff. And what I was realizing was, I was like, it was never one, there was two forms of how we were leading, right? There was leading in an incident, during an incident, whatever that is. So to me, that's fire ground, right? And then coming back and going, firehouse is a very different way to lead, right? And you have to be able to have this skill set. And what we used to do, to your point a long time ago, when you said before 9/11, we were still recruiting, right? We were still good. We were still competing for the jobs. I think there was a little bit of still national, like the pride was there. We weren't so divided and so torn of our time and attention away, right? But at the same time, like, people are still trying I feel like, I just want to say this, I feel like they don't know any better to know, okay, hold on. We've entered a different era. And so fire ground leadership that they used to be able to translate to the firehouse, which used to work, it doesn't work anymore, right? So it doesn't work to that point of saying you can't communicate the way that you used to in other ways, right? I say all the time, like, there's two 13-letter words that start with a C, end with an N, and people always focus on the word communication. They forget the word clarification, right? And I go, dude, stop telling me you have communication problems. You don't. You guys have radios, you have text, you have WhatsApp, you have every single thing to communicate. You got over the urinals to tell me what my pee color should be. You've got so many ways to communicate with me. But guess what? You're not clarifying shit. You haven't clarification, right? That's the C word that I want. That communication, perfect. Clarification, that's firehouse stuff. I need you to clear. Well, they should know it. No, they shouldn't, right? Like, they don't. It's okay. People have miscommunicated. I've been 40 years in the job. They should know. No, they don't. right? Because at that point, now you're talking about losing and right or forgetting or whatever it is at that point. And we say this all the time about saying, look, so I stay away from fire ground. We do, because that's not where we've been, right? I've done aircraft firefighting and some of that stuff, and Jason's done things on the ship that he had to. He was on the George Washington when it caught fire, so he was part of that whole big incident and part of that piece. But like, it's the firehouse that I'm going, stop. Today's generation is going to focus more, just as you said, what'd you say? Like, they care more about health. They care more about like the home life. They care more about that. They're searching for that. And yet, what are we trying to do? We're trying to push kind of the still whatevers. Like, it doesn't need to be the machoism anymore. It doesn't have to. Don't get me wrong. You got to keep it that, right? When I taught rescue swimmer school, I realized there, I was like, I teach paradoxes, right? Tim Elmore has a great book called The Eight Paradoxes of Great Leadership. And he talks about being timely and timeless and those kind of things where you kind of have to balance the two. The greatest paradox we face is the fact that we're trained to do a job we end up wishing we never have to do, right? We all hope. And I know when you come out, you want, give me the fire. Give me the fire. I just watched a really older chief talking, and he was like, dude, we have fire chiefs in charge now that have had very little fire experience, very little, but they can talk to a mayor. They can do budgets. They can do that kind of, which is great. But yet we won't part that off and go, maybe there's a route to go, right? Maybe there's a way. I think he was mentioning our number 3 car is the one that does, I forgot where he was, but he was talking about that's our lead operational. Like, hello, I just said this to somebody, there's the Volley House podcast was talking about, we should have a book for chiefs. I'm like, no shit, we have a book, right? Like, look outside your service and go, what can we do? I'll give you an example. The Navy aviation world, we have 2 master chiefs that sit there. One's mine, which is the command one, and I wear that little cookie. The other one is the aviation master chief, who is the head of the maintenance performance, right? That side of the world for aviation. That guy's sole job is to make sure the aircraft are flying, period, and all the people underneath them, right? Like, that's your fire guy as we start to move people up through this system of going, are you going to be like we do engineer, right? You do an engineer and you kind of take that route where you can move people into the administrative leadership side of it all versus the fire, the fire ground piece of it all, monumental, right? 2 pipelines in one. We don't have to have an all-in-one for it. They can work in harmony to kind of, because I don't know any gritty firefighter who loves to go to the meetings at City Hall. I don't know one of them. They're all like, I fucking gotta go do that shit, right? Nobody likes that shit. I get it. I understand. It takes that takes a knack. That takes a skill set, a patient skill set, number 1. So like, I'm the same way. Like, when I look at it and I go, there are solutions out there. You got to be willing. And luckily, I'll be honest with you, if you're seeking me, you've already taken step 1, right? Step 1 was, I know we're going to go find something somewhere. And I know we can use something. Maybe it's a different perspective. We just talked to one in Wisconsin. We're super excited to go work with them. He said literally everything I was saying. And I was like, man, I can't wait. Like, if you are up to it, we'd love to galvanize what you're already doing, right? Like, and that's the other side, right? Of like, you always get the dadism of like, yeah, dad's telling us to do it. Sure, dad, right? Like, but until you hear, man, I told you that 16 times. My kids would be like, yeah, but it's you. I don't listen to you, right? So we were like, dude, galvanizing this of saying this is exactly what, is exactly what we should be talking about when we talk about self-accountability in the firehouse part of it all. But you're right. I mean, it takes, I hope it's not going to take so long where we're just weeding, where natural attrition, right, is going to happen. And then all of a sudden we'll finally, because what I think, and you correct me if you don't see this, but we've seen this also very high leadership role. We've seen a gap. And then we see this like very, very ready to go 10 to 13 year people. But there's this gap of those 9/11ers, what I like to call them, to those other sides. So that's an interesting piece of it all too, about how we kind of work that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, talk to me then about Firehouse Freedom.
Yeah. So, okay, I just did something. You just asked, reset. I need one. Somebody just came to the door, so I don't want to freak out.
Oh, no problem. Let me write that down.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
yeah, so Firehouse Freedom is so it came off of what I was doing on Lions Guide. So what I was doing on Lions Guide, we were working the Everyday Leader. Annapolis came to us and said, "Hey, we need this." And full credit to Dale Walls at Lions Guide. He had this vision about founders freedom. It was kind of what he was doing, right? He was building this $1 million company. At the same time, he was coaching. He was going, doing his church. He was doing he had this kind of, whatever you want to call it, normal life. And so the parallel is this. I use this parallel all the time in the class. I say, you're a guy who makes stone pizzas in your neighborhood. Everybody loves them. They come over. You got the stone brick oven. It's all good. Everything's cool. Well, one of your friends goes, "Man, you should open a restaurant." You go, "Maybe I should. That'd be great." So you do. And you start there and you're like, "I'm making pizzas." And you're doing the thing in the window. Everybody's cool. And then all of a sudden you realize you got HR problems. You've got logistics. You've got supply. You've got, right, all the stuff that you do not see when you just want to make pizzas. He had that theory about business and said, man, small businesses are there. And man, they just want to do what they're there to do. They're not, right, they get caught up in all the rest. So he was helping businesses with the rest. That was a light bulb to me to go, firefighters want to just fight fires, dude. Or in this case, a lot of EMS stuff or whatever we're at, right? So the extra stuff, all the other things, how does that fit into how it needs to fit in, right? And so so he had founder freedom, and I naturally was like, man, we're trying to build this firehouse where people don't feel the weight when they have to come back. I've talked to people that are like, man, we're out on a fire, we're free, sweet, we're on the road, right? We're doing stuff. Shit, we got to go back to the firehouse. Yeah, well, that's gonna and the burden of what that was kind of. So the more I had heard about that, and the more I was getting, the responses from everybody about like, man, this is worth it, and nobody's talking about, people watching it may see the spam can. Like spam, that's not up there for just because I like it. It stands for sex, power, alcohol, and money, which are the things that bring leaders down, right? Every single leader you've ever known has fallen because of one of those four things, and I've yet. And I'll challenge the listeners to please tell me if you find another thing that some leader hasn't fallen because of a scandal, some alcohol or drugs, some power thing or money issue. But people weren't talking about those. So we started to do the workshops. So like right now, myself, Jason, and Matt, my two co-founders with me, we're looking at firehouses that we're not looking at them. They're coming to us and saying, hey, what you're talking about is what we need here, right? It's not these big theory stuff. It's the little things. It's the everyday stuff. So when we talk about simplicity, we talk about checklists, right? My gosh, I wrote an article, 2 months ago, and I was like, we use checklists all over the place, right? You check off the rigs, you check off your everything. And I challenge everybody when I get into the workshop, I'm like, how many of you have a leadership checklist? And they'll look at me like I'm fucking crazy. And I go, maybe you should put on that leadership checklist to have an attaboy or an attagirl every Friday. And they're like, right? Like, yeah, maybe that does work, Flip. Or just the little nuances. But we go on a kind of a core thing, right? And so you got to know yourself, you got to lead yourself, and then you can lead your crew, right? So it's those three phases for us. And we don't go deep. I'm not a theories. I know everyday stuff, right? So to me, who influenced you? Right? Like, so that's one of the things we talk about is who influences you. And we go and you watch people's heads kind of go, oh yeah, that's the person who influenced you. We did one of my first light bulbs we had was in Annapolis. We had a lieutenant from the inner city Baltimore. And we were talking about how, and most people know this, but you can respect the rank, but the person underneath you don't have to respect, right? But when you show up, he could not wrap his head because he was in what the whole group found out, and props to Annapolis at the time, they got all 17 of their officers together for the first time in the history. They had people covering their shifts and everything else. They had all 17 in a room. And they were like, we know everybody here. And then we always get that. We're like, we see these dudes every day. And then they learned that guy was in a gang, and that meant his rank meant more than anything. And it was tied directly to who he was. And they were like, that makes so much sense now, right? And so that was my know yourself moment of like, and everybody's at a different stage, right? You got your guy who's retiring. Dude, I promise you, you've been called firefighter for 40 years. You're going to walk out, and I guarantee you're not chief anymore, right? So what does that mean to you versus someone who's just on board going, I just became one. What does that mean for me, right? And so you kind of dive into that, and then we love to dive into mission statements and visions and go, does that match who you guys are? We're doing a group down in Georgia, brand new, just north of Atlanta, interim chief who's about to take over. And I said, hey, brother, you guys are 20 years old. Have you looked at your vision and mission? And he goes, no. He goes, I go, has it changed since you started? And he goes, I never even thought of that. And I go, you're going to tie everything you do, all this accountability to that. So you better, right? So that's one of the things we do. The second part is of know yourself is, do you know your department? Do you walk the bay? Do you understand that piece of it all? And then we move into the what I call guts or muscles, right? So that's the lead yourself. So we talk about, I have these kind of coined these abilities, but we talk about responsibility, we talk about dependability, and we get to one you'll appreciate, right? So COVID did this for everybody, which I loved. We get to the third part, which is adaptability, survivability, and weatherability. And I go, dude, your departments right now have adapted, but are they surviving? What's the survival thing to you, right? And then can you weather another storm? And we talk about all that. And then we get into the last part, which is the core applications. And that's really like, let's talk spam. Let's talk about being brilliant on your basics. I think one of the things that happens all the time, and I think you know this and have heard it, you get mishaps that happen after major events, right? Or something that you're very vulnerable at a change of command, right? So you got to go back to your basics. Or people go, why would I go back and do that? And I go, time out. You do it on the fire ground all the time. You teach basics on your fire ground, and I was like, but you don't do that in the firehouse. Let's talk about the basics of your fire department and what your company norms are versus what your SOP says. And people go, holy shit, I didn't even realize. And I go, yeah, no shit. Like once you look at it like you do the fire ground, you start to go, this isn't that hard. This is really simple. And it's stuff that we do all the time. I tend to, you said something earlier, and I'm not against it. The extremism of leadership sometimes, and I'll just keep that word out there. Some people take that, I think, the wrong way in stuff. When they don't take it fully in and don't really can digest it, I look at it like that call sign where if you don't understand it to whatever capacity, like that Delta or that SEAL was talking about it, right? They had very specific people they were leading, right? Very much, right? They were processed through to get to that point. That's different sometimes than leading your ordinary folks that have the ability to go, I'm out of here, right? Or quit on a whim or whatever the case is, right? So I always go, take it with a grain of salt when you read anything in that sense of saying, because I always tell people, people always say, I've read Extreme Ownership. I said, I had to, I love it. It's a great book. Awesome. I said, how many people act like that in here? And you'll get one person that raises their hand. I go, that's my point. Like it's a tough thing to maintain. It's really hard to maintain sometimes the very fringe edges of kind of it all. So we talk about all that kind of in there. We talk about the generational piece in there, and really it's really our kind of flagship is the 2-day of really just sitting with a group and going, let's reset you. Some is a reset, some's a galvanizing. We have a group in California that's like, the word we got on day one was we have Stockholm syndrome, and I was like, oh shit, okay. And I thought that was just how the training officer was presenting. And then we got on with the chief, and he's like, we have Stockholm syndrome. I was like, oh shit. I was like, okay. He's like, we've been trying to fix it for 2 years and we can't. He's like, and I was like, okay, well then we'll do a reset, dude. Like easy, but you got to commit. There's a commitment to this whole piece. So anyways, that's kind of our side. We'd love to come in from we know we're a different perspective. We want to be a different perspective. We're okay with that. We know we've been Firehouse adjacent for a lot of our time, but we really love, again, it's the kitchen table talks for us, and it's the actionable things that you take away from it, not just theory stuff that's kind of out there.
Beautiful. Well, for people listening, where can they find that and where can they find you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, Keith Flip Griffin. You can obviously find me there. Emails flip@firehousefreedom.com. You can go check out firehousefreedom.com. Any one of those things, just send a message any which way you can. I am, whatever it is. And we're there. And then we're starting to be more. So obviously this podcast, we got a bunch of them from some of the other fire podcasts that I've been on for those types of stuff. And I have a column in Firehouse Magazine. So if you're part of the Firehouse magazine group, I do a column on leadership called The Flip Side of the Firehouse, and I really just try to talk about stuff that seeing it from a different angle, right? Seeing the flip side is what I like to call it. So obviously taken from my call sign, but yeah. So just want to get out there and help and really, kind of push really just again, if you ask me the end of it all, we just think leadership is it's in everything. It's an everyday thing. Man. It's not it doesn't need to be hard. It can be very simple in it all. So.